Job interviews, career and life advice from just about everybody. Why, hello again. Here we are with the Job Interviews podcast. Me, Mike Barrett. My name is Mike Barrett. I'm not saying me, comma, Mike Barrett and some other person. Myself, Mike Barrett. You know, we should start over, but I'm not going to. It's Mike Barrett.
Okay.
And my
Patrick
brother.
Barrett.
Patrick Barrett.
Me, Patrick Barrett. And you, Mike Barrett.
Anyway, we are here today to have a conversation with Mark Jaquith. Did I say that right?
You did.
Oh, look at me. Okay.
As far as I know.
Right. Mark, if we didn't say it, or anyone else whose last name is also Jaquith, or whatever it should be. Apologies. Anyway, Mark is a super interesting person, super interesting subject for one of these episodes. He works in technology. He had a background that certainly at the time that he was going through like his path to get where he is, it was a less common thing. It's still probably largely uncommon if you like took all of it together, but a lot of pieces of what he did are becoming more and more, common for people to use in pursuing careers in this field. So yeah, very interesting guy, very interesting career path and set of challenges and possibilities, insights, all of that. As with all of our episodes, you may be listening to this right now. You might be thinking, well, I don't want to do this particular thing that this interview subject did. So maybe I shouldn't listen. But I would caution again, like we always do, there's a lot of stuff discussed in this episode that really applies to anyone in almost any field. And also, even if you don't see yourself going into this kind of field, it's very, very useful to know how people in the field approach problems, how they operate as an industry, how they work on projects together, how technology arises and becomes popular and dominates other forms. All of that stuff is affecting you and the world around you literally every day. Like technology it's to the point now, I think like a long time ago, having a phone in an office was like a big deal, and then like everyone just sort of needed phones after a while. And you don't even think to yourself like, oh, okay, this office has a phone. Of course it does. In the same kind of way. A while ago, even only 5 or 10 years ago, you could think, well, that company is a technology company and that other company is not a technology company. I would go as far as to say there are no companies now that are not on some level technology companies.
It would be
very,
hard
very small percentage.
Yeah. Yeah. It would be hard to avoid being a part
Right.
of these spheres.
And not just companies, obviously, but also like universities, the education industry, the non-government organizations, volunteer work, like whatever it is that you're interested in doing, you're not going to escape technology. And it's very useful to know how the technologists operate.
Yeah. Any organization of people is going to come into contact with these ideas. And we do see a lot of these common themes of effective communication is very important, and being kind of committed to whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish, being passionate about it, being driven to actually solve the problem. These ideas come up again and again. And, as you're describing, we are talking to someone today who is in a career that is, I can't think of any non-silly way to describe it. So hot right now.
Silly way. Not what
That's the way.
Interestingly, the phrase "so hot right now," I think itself is not hot anymore.
Yeah.
I think that's a thing people used to say.
I think it's from a movie. Well, it's from a lot of things, but I think I most think of it from a movie that I saw maybe in like middle school or something. But that was all I could come up with. Coding software. This is what's being brought up over and over and over again. I'm sure if you're in middle school or high school or college, you're tired of hearing people talk about coding and programming and software and everything, but there's a reason that keeps coming up. It's an important thing. It's a big deal, and we're talking with someone today who knows quite a bit about his field and is an important person in his field.
And it really is so hot right now.
So hot right now.
Yeah. So again, thank you very much for listening. As always, I think you will get a lot of useful knowledge, even if it's only like background knowledge for other decisions you might make later on. But I think there's a lot of things discussed here that people need to know, that many people who are just thinking about how to enter higher education or the workforce, whatever, don't realize. So I think it'll be very useful for pretty much anybody.
So let's get in there. Let's hear about it.
Let's be so hot right now.
So hot right now. Did you know that the kind of literary interpretation your English teacher might love to hear in a classroom discussion will actually lead you to wrong answer choices to reading comprehension questions on tests like the SAT and the ACT? To find out more, look for our SAT Prep Black Book 2nd edition and our ACT Prep Black Book 2nd edition on Amazon.com.
Hello, we are here today with Mark Jaquith. And if you could, in your own words, please just describe your job at this time.
So it's kind of in a state of flux right now. For the, this is the first take. I definitely have never said this before.
Yeah. Flux, you say. Anyways, carry on.
So for like the last 13 years, I've been doing web development as a consultant, primarily centered on WordPress, which is this, very popular web publishing software. But I found that recently I kind of burned out on consulting. And the volatility of the income, always having to look for the next client, kind of having to be a salesman as well as like a thinker and a developer. So earlier this year, I took on a gig as a CTO of a local company down in Sarasota. And they do use WordPress. They also use some other technologies. So it's been kind of fun to expand out into other areas. It's been fun, getting to to hire and to work with a bigger team and not just be
cool,
solo out there on my little sunfish in the middle of the ocean.
So for our listeners, CTO meaning Chief Technical Officer?
Chief Technical Officer.
And sunfish being a
very small
made from the sun.
sailboat that you usually are on alone.
Oh, I thought you were talking
you were floating on an actual fish. Thank you.
I'm glad I asked.
Yeah. Both are terrifying.
Either one is not the way to do it. Can you describe the company in Sarasota that you're currently working with?
Yeah, so they have a few verticals, but their biggest one is in travel. So they're like a content and intent company. So they're finding out trends in travel and what to publish that people are interested in and find interesting ways of monetizing that's not just throw as many ads as possible at them.
So one of the things that we'll do throughout this discussion is if a technical term is used that the members of the audience may not know, we'll break in, and if I can define it, I'll try to define it, or Patrick, otherwise we'll ask you.
Please. I will try and catch myself, but I'm going to miss a lot.
Well, I think it's very useful because one of the things that I think maybe isn't super obvious about careers until you have your own career is that you just pick up a lot of words that are specific to that career. And there's not really a time for the most part when someone sits you down and says, this is what a CTO is. This is what the word vertical means. This is all these things. But yeah, you just sort of pick it up over time. So a vertical is like a market, basically, right? Like it's an area of commercial behavior of some kind.
Right.
So you mentioned travel.
Travel, cars is another one, kind of like consumer shopping, like the best 10 electric razors.
Sure. That would be a vertical.
Is another vertical, yeah.
For example. Okay, cool. How did you become the CTO? Like, how did that company find you?
I decided that I wanted to start going to more like local meetups. I can be a little bit, just hide behind my computer and work. So I decided to go out to one of the local meetups, and the CEO of the company was there with one of his developers. And, I was asking them what they did. They were asking what I do. And we realized that, cool. My technical knowledge overlapped with their technical needs. So I started doing some consulting with them last year, and it worked out really well. But they wanted more, and he kept making me offers.
It's a good spot to be in.
Yeah. You said you went to meetups. How did you find out about the specific meetup that you went to? Like, what was the process?
I just went to meetup.com and started putting in search terms.
Yeah.
And at the time that you did that, was the goal just to kind of get out there and circulate and not be behind the computer? Or did you think to yourself already, I want to stop doing WordPress-based consulting, I want to get into it?
I was not shopping at the time for an employer. One of my main motivations was just to meet more people, to network, not necessarily for financial gain, but just,
sure,
kind of the social credit.
Yeah.
You said you have a tendency, to hide behind your computer and work, and then you had this impulse to stop that trend. Was there a moment where you thought, I need to kind of change how I approach this?
I haven't been outside in 3 days.
Something happens.
Yeah, no, it's not like I started to smell myself kind of situation. It's just I realized you see pictures on Twitter of people at events, and start realizing, okay, there's I could meet more people, I could widen my
sure.
viewpoints and learn new things.
Yeah, and I think it's a useful thing as you're developing a career, or really at any point in your career, to go out and circulate. And you might be thinking, or I used to think before I started doing that, well, at this moment, I'm not aware of any deficiencies, like anything I need to know that I don't know. I'm not aware of any people that I don't know that I need to know. I'm not aware of like any of that. But of course you're not, because you don't know what you don't know. And the only way to get out, the only way to find out what you don't know,
Right.
is to get out there and start talking to people. And then things just sort of.
Yeah, it's sort of amazing when you do that, like the opportunities that appear because of the people you know and what they know. And yeah, you wouldn't realize beforehand that there is a deficiency, but it just like creates these opportunities.
Yeah.
I feel like another thing, a lot of people who maybe are not optimistic about their prospective like value in the job market, or, people say, oh, it's who you know, and I don't know anybody, but you can get to know more people. You don't know anybody now, but you start somewhere and you talk to people, and just showing up somewhere, wanting to have a conversation with someone, being interested and engaged, even if you're more of an entry level type person, like,
yeah.
that people need to enter.
Right. And the first several events that I went to, I was petrified to talk to anybody because I thought, like, what do I have to say? Who cares? But it turns out that everyone feels that way, or at least everyone in my experience has been a fair percentage of people at any event are, also doubting themselves or also not sure what they have to contribute. But once you start speaking to people, everyone has something. Can you talk to us a bit about WordPress, what it is? Well, what it is, Patrick and I know what it is, of course, but, just for people who may not know what it is, and how you came to focus on that specifically as part of your consulting.
Sure. I'm going to take those in reverse order.
Please.
So when I was in college, I noticed this trend of blogging that was really taken off by started taking off like maybe late 90s was early adopters, but early 2000s, it was huge. It was like the big thing. I was interested in that. I like the idea of having a place where I could share my thoughts, and certainly like the early blogosphere, as they terribly named it. Was
Does anyone still say that, or is that? I feel like
I don't know. I just said it, and I felt really weird about it.
Blogosphere.
Yeah,
Yes.
but it was a thing you used to hear, the blogosphere.
Oh yeah, the blogosphere.
Yeah.
So now we're going to see what the blogosphere
The
is.
old media, like TV, print, they're like blogosphere.
Yeah. But do people, they say, I've heard like Twitterverse. I don't think I've heard Twitter sphere. No one says that, right?
Blogosphere. Anyway. So
I sound like I'm 1,000 years old. Anyway, please go ahead. So,
Anyway,
take us back.
there was this. It was like a small community, but like the primary mode of interaction was that someone would blog about something, and then someone else to respond would have their own blog post. So it wasn't so much like in this era where it's retweets or a quick reply, like a quick comment, a thumbs up. It was more of like long form content and then medium to long form content replies. And I thought that was a really cool idea, and I wanted to get in on that. So I started, using various clunky softwares at the time, and I quickly found out that I wanted more control over how the site worked and how things were presented. So I started looking around for some software that would give me more options than what I was using. And at this time, this is like early 2004, there was Movable Type, which is what I was using. I didn't want to learn the programming language that it was based on because it's a really, really old one, even at the time. And there were a few options, Expression Engine, Text Pattern, and WordPress were the three ones I was considering. And WordPress won out because, well, first of all, it was free. Didn't have to pay any money to get the software, and it was open source. You could use the software however you wanted. And also there's a really great community behind it. Like, log into a chat room and people would help you out, and it's a really supportive community. And so I switched over to that, started writing code for that. And then about a month later, there was this incident where the software I was using, Movable Type, previously had been free, and then they announced their pricing model for the new software. Yeah. And like the way some people were using it, like even though they had one website, they had like multiple instances of the software running. Sure. Like people were doing like a little like Twitter-esque like sidebar thing.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
So some people are like, well, this can cost me like $600, $800. And so there's this mass exodus almost entirely to WordPress.
Yeah.
And it just took off from there.
I knew that WordPress took off at that time. I didn't realize it was because of that sort of cash grab by its competitors.
It was, yeah. It was just a very ill-conceived, like they didn't quite think out, and they backpedaled on some of that, like introduced kind of ways where you wouldn't have to pay like for multiple seats. It was just all on one site, but the damage had already been done.
Wow. Huh.
So at this point, you were just a user still. You were just somebody with your own blog, kind of trying to start.
I was actually, like, from day one, I was contributing code. So like literally I had to write code to migrate my site from the old software. So I wrote some.
When you say contributing code, can you explain?
Yeah, so writing code, and then I was publishing it so that others could use it
On your blog, or is there like essentially like a work?
Was
yes.
GitHub a thing then, or
GitHub was not a thing.
Okay, so so what were you doing at that time?
It would be on my site primarily. Yeah.
Huh.
So as you were working on your site, you were sharing the code that you were using to add the features you wanted to use so other people.
Correct.
And then were you also then, using code from other people in the community that, were doing things you like?
Yeah, there was absolutely this like code sharing community. And then from there, I started contributing code back to WordPress itself, like the core of the software, just like helping out on the bug tracker, testing other people's code, prioritizing things for the developers.
Was this a thing where it sounds like it was a very egalitarian kind of open group? Did people just recognize that you were very good at this and very dedicated to it, and that's how you kind of got to the point that you could be prioritizing things for others, or how did that happen?
Yeah, that was absolutely it. It was that I was helpful, that I had an attention to detail, and that I was like one of the people who showed up.
Huh. That's really cool. If I can ask, like, how were you feeding yourself at this time? Were you still in school and
I was
living that
yes,
way?
I was still in school at the time.
Cool. And so you would just sort of spend your free time. You enjoyed this project and kind of devoted your energy
my
to
free time, or time that I should have been spending in class.
or time that was not
so
free.
free time.
Yes.
Yeah.
So on that topic too,
Yeah.
how did you learn the programming languages that you were using? And could you, getting as technical as you feel like is appropriate, could you explain what was so bad about the Typeform languages or language versus the language that WordPress used?
Yeah. So I had some experience with programming when I was younger, but different languages that weren't really used on the web. I'd learned HTML, which is basically the language for how to lay out a web page. I'd learned that when I was probably 12, 13. So I had that background.
Sorry if I can interrupt. Was that through like a school classroom thing, or did you
HTML for Dummies?
HTML for Dummies, and you were like, "Hey,
pretty sure
Physical
first
book
edition." Yeah.
wow, that's amazing."
And
yellow and black.
Were you already interested? Like, was that your first entry into that world, or you know what I mean? Did you just find the book and thought, "Oh, that'll be cool to learn about that," or were you?
Did you think to yourself beforehand, that you wanted to learn how to lay out web pages, or?
Yeah, So I mean, the web was taken. This is like 95. AOL's in its heyday. And
yeah, this is taking me back. Yeah.
AOL stands for America Online. I just realized, I don't know if anybody knows.
Yeah. For a member of the audience, if you know like a very old person whose email address ends in @AOL.com.
This is that AOL.
That's when it came
the
from.
very
All
same
right,
one.
so
95 AOL is huge.
Yeah, I wanted to get into websites. So learned HTML. But I'd say my like web programming kind of plateaued until I was in college. Like I knew how to lay out a basic web page, maybe a little bit of scripting on the page, but really basic stuff.
So when you were reading HTML for Dummies, did you have like, I want to make a little money doing this for businesses, or I'm into this thing and I want to just put up a website about it? Like
zero inclination insight that would be happening.
Cool. And scripting, please tell me if I'm characterizing this the wrong way, but in my mind, scripting would be related to sort of dynamic elements on a page, or like
making it do something.
There's a better way to describe
it. So HTML would just be like, the content, like here's a headline, like here's a paragraph.
Sure.
Yeah.
Here it is.
Yeah. And then the scripting, JavaScript is the other world.
Here's a dumb question. Is scripting a kind of coding, or are these separate like entities, separate?
It's not a dumb question. It is a very complicated question, but not really one we should get into. Like programming is maybe like the more like rigorous, and scripting is more freewheeling. maybe one.
Wow.
But I mean,
This is a way more
some people.
interpretive answer than I was
It's like a literature discussion.
Yeah.
Well, it depends on who you are.
But that's an interesting point too. I think for a lot of people, like a lot of younger clients and readers, that we talk to, I nearly always suggest to them, no matter what field they're interested in, that they should learn something related to technology, something related to computer programming, software, interfacing with machines in any kind of way. And they nearly always say, if they don't want to do it or they haven't already started, they say something like, well, I'm just like too creative for that, or it seems like it would be so boring.
Too creative to create things.
Right. But this is kind of what I wanted to get to. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems from what the way that you just answered that question, there is a lot of creativity, a lot of problem solving and those kinds of things that can be done within the framework of
Sure. I mean, it's
coding
a
technology.
Different type of creativity. Sometimes people talk about creativity and they're implying that it's artistic creativity.
Yeah.
That I'm painting, I'm sculpting. Photography is
Sure.
I don't know, starting to get more into the problem solving because there's a lot of like scientific things like
aspects of
light and apertures and stuff. But yeah, problem solving can be very creative. But I think people think that they have to be super analytical to get into it. And you have to be a little analytical to do it, but you have to be a little analytical to just survive as a human being.
To do it.
keep breathing. Yeah.
Right.
To use an ATM. To do any of those kinds of things. Yeah. Huh. So when you mentioned JavaScript as part of, my understanding is that WordPress runs primarily on PHP and JavaScript and like MySQL.
That's correct.
Are there other things as well that you needed to learn, or and how did you learn each of those things?
There's so many things. Like I think oh yeah, that's what it runs on. But then like you have to know about HTTP, that hypertext transfer protocol, which is like how web pages get sent to your browser. You need to know about web servers, so like the computers that are giving you those web pages.
Does CSS fall under the umbrella of something we already mentioned, or is that a separate thing?
That's on my list, CSS, which is so if HTML is like the content of the page, the CSS is the colors and the typography and the alignment and
that's like global,
how it looks.
Yeah, and I think the purpose of CSS is to give everything a uniform appearance, right? Is that basically it? In as efficient a way as possible?
Right. Yeah. So it used to be that people would code websites and they would have like a paragraph in HTML and they'd have to put all the style for that paragraph kind of into that paragraph, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So if you had a second paragraph, you'd have to copy that and have it there
style
again.
Each element.
Yeah. So CSS.
So every time you're writing a paragraph, you're redoing all that
redoing
work.
it. And it's really clunky. And CSS is more like a way of, hey, anytime there's a paragraph, here's what I want it to look like. Or like, okay, here's this special paragraph that looks slightly different, but still has all the look and feel of the original paragraph.
Cool. And so all of this you taught yourself? Was there like CSS for dummies, JavaScript for dummies?
Yeah. So PHP, which is a programming language or scripting language, depending on your point of view. Okay. I bought a super thick book for that. I forget the name of it, but it was like just like this giant Bible of a book.
Wow.
And I cranked through that.
Did you read it cover to cover, or was it like a reference, like encyclopedia?
I did read it cover to cover, and then have to go back and use it as a reference.
Yeah.
This is a really ignorant question too. The little bit of like programming that I feel able to do, I learned that basically by like trying to do it and failing, and then like trying again and failing, and just over and over and over again. Whenever I would try to read a resource on, for example, just PHP as a thing, it would have so much stuff that was extraneous to what I actually needed it for that I didn't, read the whole thing. It seems to me, again, as someone who doesn't really know what I'm talking about, it seems to me like to read all of that book sort of in the abstract without trying hands-on to like actually do the things that were in the book.
Well, that would be very hard. So when I say I read cover to cover, I didn't mean in like one sitting. I eventually got through the entire book.
I see. So at some point you have read every part of it.
Yes.
Based on what you needed for a particular time.
So, but yeah, of course, like you read the first little bit and you're like, okay, I feel empowered now. I can do this because it's just this small little subset. And you go and try and like, oh my gosh, it works.
I see.
And then you say, I wonder if I can do this. Let's read forward. Oh, yeah, there we go.
So when you're trying these things out, this is in like a WordPress installation somewhere, or is this in some other environment where you can,
When I got started, I wasn't using WordPress yet.
Okay.
So this was just, just
So
raw
you started
PHP.
learning PHP separately from the WordPress stuff.
Yep.
Oh, I thought it was as
so
a
when you
consequence,
were
but okay.
getting into the blogosphere, you already had PHP knowledge. Is that accurate?
No. So
okay.
it was first I started my blog, and then I wanted to control it some more. So I learned some PHP that even though the site wasn't running on PHP, I could
You get insights.
I could write my templates in PHP to kind of.
So this was your pre-WordPress blog. This was
Yes.
it was blogging.
This was
software,
Movable Type?
but it was
Movable Type.
Movable
Yeah.
Type.
Okay. And what language was that?
Movable Type is written in Perl.
I've heard of that, but I know nothing about it.
Perl takes me back. Yeah. I struggled with Perl in the website that we had before WordPress.
Many moons ago.
Couldn't get it to work.
Perl
Yeah.
is a very, very powerful language, but it is arcane. There's the joke that if you let a cat walk across a keyboard, it will likely generate valid Perl code. It is just this, and the old school Perl developers love that because they can do these they're called Perl one-liners.
all the secrets.
Perl
A
one-liner.
one line of code
Wow.
that does 14 operations in these weird ways that you just have to know about. And that really
so
didn't
cool.
seem like a thing that it wasn't very inviting.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing if someone else knew it, I'd be like, oh, that's cool, but I don't want to learn how to do it.
Right. Like your first language is not going to be Klingon.
Right.
Usually.
Start with Spanish or something.
So Movable Type is written in Perl, and I believe I'm also gathering from what you're saying, you can sort of use Perl to run PHP. Is that kind of
So there's Movable Type itself is written in PHP, but Movable Type will generate essentially templates for your pages. So you might have here's my single blog post template. This is how it should look. And if instead of making those .html files that are just kind of like plain HTML, you can make them .php, and then all of a sudden the PHP engine does it looks for these magic little parts that give it a bit of functionality. So I was doing that to kind of, add functionality to little bits of it. But that didn't give me the ability to change the software itself. Just kind of it's how it was presented. If that
okay?
makes sense.
I think I get that.
So not like the core functionality.
Not the core functionality.
Like the features and the dressing and the style and
Right. And that was one of the things I wanted to change was I wanted to do hook in and change the way comments worked.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it'd be really cool. We've all had this experience where you send out a tweet and no matter how many times you've read it, you see the typo as soon as you press tweet.
Mm-hmm.
And the same was true of blog comments, which kind of the tweets of the day.
Yeah.
And I thought it'd be really cool if you could let someone edit their comment for 15 minutes after they submitted it to catch those typos.
It's so crazy because I basically take that kind of thing for granted, as a thing that a web page would allow. But someone had to think of that and make it be a thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So then I found okay, if I really want to do this right, I need to learn Perl, and I don't want to.
So you mentioned you were doing, I think you said raw PHP at that point. Is that in Dreamweaver or Notepad? I have no idea what.
Sorry, maybe it was, but it's just the way you said it was funny.
Now that I know that.
I'm trying to remember what I remember for HTML. I was using it's called Front Page Express, which is a Microsoft
I
product.
vaguely recall that being a thing.
That was a slightly WYSIWYG.
Is that like a WYSIWYG? Yeah.
Slightly WYSIWYG, but you could also go
Which stands for what you see.
what you see is what you get.
Yeah.
For the audience, yeah.
Yes. Also known as, these days we would say drag and drop editor. It would be the modern version of WYSIWYG.
That's so much cooler sounding than WYSIWYG. Yeah. WYSIWYG sounds like a Willy Wonka kind of a...
It sounds like a
Dr. Seuss character.
Yeah, it does.
Yes.
It's like a helpful guy with a beard. Oh, go ask WYSIWYG.
Horton finds a WYSIWYG.
So
anyway.
Well, I was going to ask about... Okay, so while you were in school, devoting a lot of your time that you maybe didn't necessarily have to learning all this kinds of stuff, what were you learning in school? What were the classes you were skipping in school so that you could be doing this?
I was skipping business classes. So I was at the University of Florida as a business major. And I was bored out of my mind by the second year and certainly by the third year.
Mm-hmm. What was it that bored you? Can you remember specifically which kinds of classes?
I don't know. It felt so like I liked the earlier classes, like macro and microeconomics were really interesting. Financial accounting was really interesting and fun. And then it just kind of got into the like HR and like more abstract business principles that I don't know. I felt like I was itchy to do something, and it was just all this boring theory.
So while you're sitting, or maybe sometimes not sitting in the class, while all the stuff is going on, you're like this growing celebrity on the internet, like in this growing community of stuff.
Right. I'm learning new skills. I'm getting accepted by this community, like sharing code, feeling
productive
like and
adult,
valued. And
like you're doing stuff.
My brain was expanding.
This is like a perfect metaphor for like 2019 and the person in college who's like not doing anything out of it. And I always like themselves like something that they can use. So it sounds like you didn't lack interest in business necessarily, but you weren't getting like what felt like the actual business part of it that's interesting where you do stuff. You were bogged down in the boring things.
Right. And just like business as an abstract concept, I think is fundamentally boring. Business is only interesting when you have a business.
Yeah.
Leverage those skills.
I was going to draw maybe a parallel between that and the notion of like learning PHP from a book. Like, so the PHP has a bunch of different concepts in it. Until you need them, you can't really like do anything.
They don't mean anything to you.
Right.
Yeah.
Could it be argued that the business classes were sort of just like a big PHP book, and until you get out there and actually have your own problems to solve, possibly using those principles, it's very hard to sit in a class in?
Absolutely.
It's interesting because we were just talking to somebody who is an engineer and runs a business, and he's established for a few years, and he was describing his day, and a lot of it is accounting stuff and HR stuff. And it makes so much more sense that like, if that's about your business, you're going to learn it. But it is kind of a weird idea to sit in a room when you don't have anything of yours and learn that. And how could you care?
Right.
Difficult.
Like I think
into that.
There would be more value in having like people of many different majors take a lot of these like economics and accounting classes and just like apply that to, the area that they're going to go into.
Plug that into
it just seems so weird to be like, what are you going to go into? Business. Well, what's your business? My business is business, pal. Right. What's your business?
Well, and that's, if I could elaborate also for the benefit of our maybe younger listeners, when you have a business, I think if it's a successful business, you think of the business as a way to solve problems for people. Mm-hmm. And like you're saying, if you don't have the problem that you're solving, or the product that solves the thing, or the service, or whatever it is, then what are you even talking about?
How can you be a businessman if you don't already have a
business? The business is a reaction to something. It doesn't exist first, and then we go find a problem. I mean, some people will say, I want to think of a problem to solve, but you still got to do that first.
Right.
And the business comes like around that. And
and business just means like doing.
Yeah. Right. Busyness.
What do you do? I'm a doer.
Right. I'm always busy, but don't.
I'm going to school, studying, doing.
Right. That's funny because you were being busy.
Yeah, you were actually busy when you weren't in the classes about being busy. Yeah. You were busy.
And it took me a long time to realize, like, to connect those dots that, like, I am being kept busy doing something else that I like.
Right.
Why don't I just do that?
Yeah. Did you, at the time that you decided to just go off and do that, and I want to cover the details of how that arose in a bit, but when you eventually decided to shift towards just focusing on WordPress and growing with that, did you have an idea at that point how you would get paid for it? Or did you think of any sort of commercial aspects?
Yeah. So honestly, that was sort of the thing that, lit the light bulb for me. Was so I was doing all this code on WordPress, and then, people started saying like, hey, you're good at this. Can I pay you to develop this feature for me, or, build this website for me? Or
were these business owners or people in general?
It was,
do you remember?
Some of them were just like friends
who just wanted their websites.
Right. But then they had like small businesses. Like one of the friends was like, he's a private detective, but he had like this like side.
Does he want to be in a
talk to that guy?
So he had a side thing doing.
It was just like a political blog. So he covered South Dakota politics.
Somebody's got to.
Yeah. He cornered that market. Like,
that's a smart thing. I mean, it's popular.
And so he had you
so
build like a plugin or something, or what did you build?
I'm trying to remember. I think he just had features he wanted on his site. Like, the templates changed. Like, start out with really simple stuff. And I did like migrations, like a lot of people again were moving to WordPress, so I handled a lot of those migrations.
And migrations, again, please correct me if I'm wrong. That's basically where there is like content, images, whatever on one
place or one piece of software,
and running on one piece of software, and then you want it to be somewhere else, possibly running on different software.
Right.
And so like
it's like imagine you have like an Android phone and you want an iPhone, and you have to migrate everything.
And you would like all the same stuff, like
right? Yeah, you
don't
want to lose all your
on the other platform.
You don't lose all your posts and all your photos.
Most guarantees for test prep courses make it sound like you can get your money back if you don't like the course. But if you actually try to exercise that guarantee, you'll probably get an unpleasant surprise. Most companies use tactics like requiring you to document your scores before and after their course to prove that the course really didn't help you. Or even just rejecting your claim if you don't attend every single class session in the course. In some cases, even if they do actually honor their guarantee, all that actually means is you get to take the same course over again, the course that failed to help you the first time around. But at Quest Prep, our guarantee is much simpler. If you're unhappy with our online video course for the SAT or the ACT, all you have to do is let us know within 30 days and you get every single penny back. You don't have to prove anything to us or jump through any hoops. If you don't like the course, then we don't want to keep your money. To learn more about the other unique attributes of our courses, stay tuned to the end of this episode or just head over to questprep.com and click the courses tab.
You said that your friends were contacting you about this. Were these friends that you knew in real life already, or these are people that you met through?
No, none of these. No, these are all people I met through the WordPress.
And so was this
forums?
Like, if I was going to say it was forums?
There are forums. There was like a chat room. Chat room was pretty hopping. There was a mailing list.
Wow.
So, yeah, there was. Yeah,
by mailing list, I'm assuming email list.
An email list.
Okay.
Yeah. So, it's like, and just realizing people probably don't know what email lists are so much these days. But it was like instead of just
why would I ask to get email? Yeah.
Right. It's not like just you're receiving email, but you can send email back, and then everyone else on the mailing list gets it. It's like a group chat via email.
Yeah.
Wow.
So you said you were starting to be approached by people who wanted you to do things, and you said that was, as you said, the light bulb for. Wait a minute. Yeah.
So, it started out as just small amounts of money, and I was just like, okay, cool, beer money. And then people started wanting ongoing work, like, if they would have 20 hours a month to throw my way, and the money started to become like a little bit more substantial. So beer and pizza.
Yeah. What kind of work was that? Like recurring work?
Like scaling was a big thing. Like people had these sites that are getting really popular and they're getting just crushed under the traffic. Like the servers couldn't keep up.
So was that when you started doing that kind of work, did that necessitate you? Did you already have that skill set? Because
I did not. No, I
from the other thing. Yeah.
I just had to learn that on the fly.
So is that a common thing at that point in your career where someone says, "Please do this job for me," and you think, "I can't do that yet," but then you just turn around and figure it out and then do it.
They say, frequently, "Can you do this?" And I'll be honest and say, "Well, I haven't done that, but I probably can figure it out."
Yeah, I think I can. Oh. And did you ever get any pushback on like, what makes you think you can do it if you've never done it? Or they just kind of trusted you?
Not really, because they knew they couldn't do it.
Yeah.
So I just even saying that, like, I think I can is like gives them so much hope.
You can do
well,
this.
and you also had, I'm guessing, a bit of a reputation or a body of work or whatever from being on the forums and submitting code. Like people knew that you were a reliable provider of this kind of thing.
Right.
And I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. So that built to the point where, again, it's just beer and pizza money at that point. But my big epiphany came.
Still in college at this?
Still in college. I switched to a biology major at this point because I just gotten so disenchanted with business and honestly depressed and skipping classes that. Mm-hmm. So I switched to biology. So I was doing that. And the one client I had sent me an email that said, "Hey, we're worried that you're going to go get a job at Google or something. And we're going to lose you, and you're not going to be able to help us out." And so they voluntarily gave me a 133% raise, more than doubled my hourly rate.
Well, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
And so it was instigate that. They just said to you,
out of the blue,
"Please don't leave.
Here's more than twice your hourly rate."
Feel good.
Wow.
It felt good and terrible because I realized, wow. Oh, first of all, I'm undervaluing my time, which doesn't feel great.
Yeah.
And it also kind of shook me, destabilized me, because it made me realize hey, you could do that. Mm-hmm. This could be I did the math. I took the hourly rate and I did,
sure.
Let's see, say times 40 times 52.
This could be a thing. Yeah.
I'm okay. And like, it's funny now because I look back at the number, like, you know, it was a big number for a college kid. But
Sure.
Yeah.
Now, not so much, but at the time.
But yeah, it was a start. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was kind of scary because like, I'd always just considered it like just a hobby, just a fun thing to do. And like the thought of it being a career was kind of a lot.
Yeah.
Did it take time to adjust to that? Like, how did you kind of work through that feeling, I guess?
Yeah, it probably took me a few months. And it was just honestly,
Wow.
I would just sit and tumble the idea around in my head. Like, hey, you've been going to college for, I think at this point, 4.5, almost 5 years.
Yeah.
No degree to show for it.
Did you have any people in your family who had done some kind of like thing on their own, or did you have a model that you could look at as another adult in your life who had done something like what you were considering doing?
I didn't really. No, maybe my grandfather might have been the closest. He was like an engineer, but yeah, no, I didn't really have like an entrepreneur mentor in that sense. So I think that made it scarier.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I felt like, okay, I'm going to go to my father, a doctor, and my mother, like a nurse, like long time, schooling,
Yeah.
big serious careers.
Yeah.
And be like, hey, I know you helped send me to college for 5 years, but I'm going to drop out, not get a degree, and do this other thing.
So how did that go?
To their credit, they were supportive.
That's really great.
So did you kind of say, look, this is what I've been doing. I've been making money, like kind of prove your
Yeah, that's true. It's not like you were just jumping ship with nothing.
It wasn't like on a lark, like you had some,
Right. The numbers weren't super great at the time because it was going from very part-time to full-time.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't have to like show them a prospectus or anything.
Yeah. I remember thinking at the time, WordPress was like my first sort of, the first time I became aware that open source code was a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw people finding ways to sell their expertise, related to that. But in my mind, before that, software was always a thing you had to buy or license or, something along those lines. And it just sort of
go to Office Max and get out of a bin.
Right. You would buy a physical box of software and then take it home.
A nice shiny hologram.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you were explaining to your parents or whoever else it might have been, or even when you were just thinking about like your future possible career in this field, did the fact that the product was free in a sense like weigh on your mind in terms of whether it would be successful or not? Did that affect anything in your thinking?
It didn't, because I knew I was selling my time and my expertise. And honestly, within the next year, the US went into a recession. And the fact that, the WordPress core software was free and all you're paying for is maybe add-ons and like your hosting cost and your labor.
And that's if you want to, you don't have to.
But sure. Yeah. I mean, those you can scale as well. So I started consulting for like bigger companies, like, local newspapers who are paying $250,000 a year just on a software licensing cost. And, times got tough. Their accountants are like, hey, is there anything we can do about this?
Right. Yeah. Well, there's a free one actually.
Right. So I started doing really well when that recession hit. Because a lot of people, saw opportunity to.
How did those people find you? Like, how did your first newspaper client become aware that you?
Word of mouth is generally the way it happened. So, like, my status in the community really, really helped for sure. But then, these again, it's who you know. So, someone who knows someone says, "Hey, who do you know who's good at this?" And they would recommend me.
Sure. And also again, for the audience, if I'm putting myself back. Thinking what I would have thought as a 15-year-old hearing what you just said, I think, I was also a very negative young person, but I think I would have viewed that as sort of like cronyism or, it's not a good thing that it's like who you know and not how good you are at something, but
it's also hard to recommend or hire someone you don't know.
Right, exactly.
Right.
It's more of a natural human,
Yeah, and a concept that we've kind of heard in a variety of these interviews now. And you mentioned it earlier, kind of when that client reached out to you and said, hey, we don't want to lose you. You're a skilled provider of this thing that we need desperately, so we're going to pay you a lot more, even though you didn't ask us. Mm-hmm. That really drives home the idea that it is hard to find talented, competent, driven,
engaged
people. Yeah, it just really is hard to find. And when you find someone like that,
as a business owner,
as a hirer, whoever, you are motivated to hold on to them because it's really hard to find them. And so for people who might be concerned about how they're going to make their way in the world, or what kind of job will they get, or all these kinds of, questions that plague all of us, and were probably among the things that were plaguing you when you were debating whether you were going to do this or not. I think it can be reassuring to know that if you really just show up, work hard, be interested, ask questions when you don't know what's going on, that alone will put you ahead of the vast majority of other people out there who might be also looking for jobs or looking for.
Absolutely. I see, like, all the time I see like people reach out to me and like, hey, I'm, looking for work in this, in this area. Can you recommend me? And then I like go look at their GitHub page to see like what they're doing. And they're like, they have nothing. I'm like, okay, you may have these skills.
Yeah.
Right.
Like you could be very easily showing that and like really putting your name into the hat.
Yeah. And can you elaborate on what GitHub is and what role it now plays in the
so
profession?
GitHub is like YouTube for code. It is.
That's a really good way to describe
it. Yeah. I understand it perfectly.
Right.
That was
Thank you.
The comments are a little bit less toxic.
Pretty low bar.
Right. So basically, if you have code and you want to share it with other people, either publicly or privately within a team, obviously that code is like on your computer. You need to get it between computers and onto servers. GitHub will store that for you and keep like all the old versions of it, as well as have like a ticketing system, like a bug reporting system, communication tools, stuff like that. But GitHub also kind of serves as a portfolio of sorts for developers.
LinkedIn sort of, but for
I was about to say that. Yeah.
So if you were a young software developer, one thing you could maybe do, I think I've heard of this, but tell me if I'm getting it wrong. You could develop your own projects and put them on GitHub, and then a potential employer or partner, collaborator would be able to look at that and kind of see the way you think about problems.
Right. Yeah, you could do that, do your own projects, or just contribute to existing projects. So like all of your activity. So like they're like the huge open source projects like WordPress, but there's thousands and thousands of huge projects that you can contribute to.
So would it happen that like a WordPress developer sort of puts it out to the community, hey, I need someone to fix like this one thing, and then people submit their possible fixes for it, and one of them and that becomes like the real fix? Is that kind of how it works?
Yeah, it can be very complicated and sometimes political. But yeah, people put forth an idea and they say, here's how I think it should work. Here's why I think this is a better solution. Here are the other things I've considered. Here's maybe an example implementation, or maybe someone else pipes up with that. And then there's discussion, there's testing. You weigh like the cost of like having to maintain that going forward, and does this break anything else that we need to tell people about, and all those things go into that consideration.
So in that situation you described, is it the case that WordPress as an organization has like a core group of paid people who work for WordPress, and they are keeping track of this, but then they're also in communication with these people who kind of pitch in and help out a little? Like,
yeah. So
how did you describe that?
WordPress itself is kind of not an entity, if that makes sense.
It doesn't, but keep going.
It is just a project. Like there's no one who's really employed by WordPress. There is
I knew there's a
foundation. Yeah, there's a creator. So essentially, yes, the creator essentially owns it.
Okay.
But there's also the foundation. The WordPress Foundation owns the trademark on WordPress. And also does like educational.
Is it a nonprofit?
It is a nonprofit foundation. I forget the 50 whatever designation.
501c.
It's one of the educational one.
Yeah.
So that holds the trademark. But there are people who are paid to contribute to WordPress, but it's generally because the business that employs them uses WordPress, and it's kind of a way of giving back, and also
philanthropy, almost
a little bit philanthropy, and also just looking out for their own interests, like
they're making it for themselves anyway. So they're
right, and they're sharing with it. Yeah, because if you have a problem and you can solve it for yourself, for your website, you could solve it for your website, like write your own like add-on code, but then you have to maintain that forever yourself.
Okay. So it's like a trade-off.
Right. But so if you kind of donate it,
like put it in the mothership,
and it can go in the mothership, other people
other people care about it,
are invested in it too. And it turns out like a lot of these problems are common problems. So like you get like, I had an issue with one of my clients where there's a user system in WordPress where you can register. So like everyone who's an author can sign up and they're in the system. And it turned out like when you had more than 1,000 users, it would crash. Like it couldn't handle that. So I wrote the code to like break that out into pages and add a search feature so you could find the 978th user by their email address or whatever.
Another thing I've always taken for granted.
Yeah, again, did not happen. It was literally a single page that just listed the users because it started out like sites had like 5 users at most. So I wrote that code for the client, and then I contributed it back to WordPress, and it got adopted. And turns out like that wasn't a weird edge case. Like lots of sites now have. I literally.
Was that your first thing that got adopted?
That was my first like major feature, I would say, that got adopted. Nice. But yeah, I just funnily
of or related to a funnel.
Funnery.
Or anyway. Just the following story is funny to me. Colon.
Yes. Colon. I saw a tweet earlier today from a friend in the WordPress community, and they were talking about scaling issues on sites with between 1 and 2 million users. Whoa. So I'm like, okay, wow, people have taken this. I thought it was a big problem and multiplied it by 1,000.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that actually is another question I wanted to ask you. So you mentioned that some of the earlier problems you were dealing with were related to scaling. Now, I think I know, but please correct me if I'm wrong, given that a lot of sites run on basically like infrastructure, AWS or whatever, that allows them to scale kind of without even thinking about it. I'm guessing that the scaling thing is not so much like the problem you deal with
You
now.
would be surprised. So the reality of scaling has not completely caught up to the hype. So, at some point we moved from talking about servers, like an individual computer box sitting in a data center, just generating web pages. We moved away from that and we talked about the cloud. So like the cloud is like this, maybe it's one server, maybe it's 1,000, and you don't need to know the details. That has not really become a reality for large parts of the internet.
Okay.
Like the capabilities are there, but all the pieces haven't been connected together. There are some good solutions now that are starting to do that. But I'd say until very recently, there's still a lot of work to just orchestrate.
Just to help someone
Is the
scale.
obstacle the software to make that a reality? Basically, that's what hasn't become real yet.
Yeah, it's all just the back end, really boring technical software to like handle. Like, okay, so you have one server, it has all your images on it. We need another server. Okay, so how do you split requests between 2 servers? Well, you need another box that gets all the requests and then sends them one to A, one to B. But what about all the data that was on that server? It needs to be on that new server. How do they share that? What happens if you change the data on one server but not the other server? And it's like, those are complicated questions, and the solutions.
Times a million.
Yeah.
I feel like every one of those discussions at the end, times a million.
You're right. A billion.
Right.
Forgot about that.
So are the problems that you, up until recently when you were doing more consulting, were the problems that you were doing towards the end of your consulting career or whatever roughly the same as the problems you started out solving, or did they evolve over time?
They definitely evolved. I started getting more into security. So, keeping your site secure from attackers, spammers, stuff like that.
Was that the sort of thing, again, that you didn't really know how to do till you did it? Or did your other experience kind of make that?
Did not know how to do that before I got into it. And honestly, it wasn't just me figuring it out. Like the whole web was figuring it out.
The world, I think, to an extent,
security,
we're still figuring it out, right? I mean, we have a lot more now than we used to, but
yes. And it's getting like the bugs now are getting more obscure. We're kind of narrowing down on these weird little cases. But like back in the early days, it was like the web was tremendously insecure. Like I think like the first software I ever wrote was like a movie database for like my DVD collection. I just wanted to organize it. And
wow,
what age were you at the time?
Oh, I was 20 or 20. Yeah, somewhere in that age.
Yeah.
So that was my first PHP code after I was reading that big Bible of a
Your
book.
first like project.
My first whole project.
Knowledge. Yeah. Okay.
And like, a year or two later, I look back at that code and like, wow, it was I just like, whatever you typed into the address bar just got like funneled back to the database server in a way that you could completely
You could have
just
given
go right
a
in.
command.
could have changed what movies I own.
Lock it, unlock it. Start your car and drive it down the street. Yeah.
But like the whole web was like that. Like it wasn't like, day one, the web had security figured out.
Well, I think when the web was created, the idea that you would store valuable information on it, like sensitive information, like credit card numbers and stuff, that wasn't really what it was for at first, right? Or no?
Correct. Well, the idea that the web would really do a lot of stuff was kind of revolutionary. Like that you'd have web applications was, I think, not really foreseen.
Huh?
Yeah, it was more just like here are documents, like a document
sharing data and documents and that sort of
thing. It was just documents that were interlinked was the main idea.
Do you think if someone listening to this were like, oh, I'd like to become a WordPress consultant or some kind of open source project consultant, what problems would you think they might be seeing themselves dealing with in the next 5 or 10 years?
What problems?
Well, you mentioned security, for example. Like, are there other kinds of things that are sort of emerging now, or is it hard to predict that?
Well, I would say one thing that's changed a lot is it's gotten more complicated. So as the web has matured, our tools have matured and become more powerful, more nuanced, but there's a lot more to learn. Like it used to be back in the day, you'd learn PHP, HTML, CSS, a little JavaScript, or maybe you didn't even like think you knew JavaScript. You just knew like jQuery or something that like simplified JavaScript.
Yeah.
And now it's exploded. They're like, if I made the list of things you have to know, it's like 40 items long.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say one of the challenges today is just how much there is to learn.
Is it the case that your understanding and knowledge of any set of things on that list of 40 things kind of helps you understand the other ones? Like they're kind of connected and similar structurally enough that it's not like you're learning 40 completely separate ideas, from a how difficult it is standpoint, I guess. Would you say that's?
I would say, yes, that's the case. A lot of what you learn, if it's about scripting or programming, you can apply to other things.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's just, it's like you may know a lot about how languages are constructed, like nouns and verbs and all that stuff, but it's still hard when you're learning all the nouns and verbs of a new language.
A set of things, yeah. What like problems do you see coming in the next 5-10 years?
Yeah, right. Can you please predict the future?
Yeah, tell me, what are the lottery numbers for?
Overall, like I'm pretty optimistic about coding. I think it's a fairly future-proof thing. Like until we hit
there's going to be something that gets needed.
Like here's the thing, like when the singularity hits and computers become sentient,
I was really hoping
up until that moment
this conversation
we're going to have jobs maintaining them for a while.
For a little while.
We're going to have like another 5 years of job security.
We're all just building rockets to get off of.
Right. And then once the machines fire you because they're good enough to maintain themselves, you get a job with the resistance taking them down.
So you thought this out.
Yes.
So do you need a college degree to join the resistance?
You really don't.
What are they looking for?
Do you think, kind of on the topic of what you just mentioned, actually, do you think that artificial intelligence would be, so a second ago you were saying if you were going to list out the things that you would need to know now to kind of jump into what you do, it would be like 40 things long or so. Like when you got into this field, as you said, it was a much smaller list of things that you needed to know. It was a much less mature marketplace or whatever. So just kind of looking around at other areas of technology that might be in that sort of embryonic stage or kind of nearer to that stage. I'm thinking of things like AI, self-driving cars, all that kind of stuff. Would learning the basics of artificial intelligence stuff be sort of like
what is that even?
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, would that be the PHP of now? Like, would that be the kind of booming, developing thing?
So yeah, people say artificial intelligence, which is kind of like this goal, but like the real thing, which has like literally you can use this today on your iPhone, is machine learning. Like just getting these huge sets of data and essentially letting a computer write the code to train itself.
Data, yeah.
So the crazy thing about machine learning is like you think like, okay, so I have this list of images like say you want to identify dogs in images. So you give it like, here's 1 million images, and then here's like 10,000 images that are dogs. Here's 10,000 images that are not dogs. And the computer kind of like, thinks about it and develops its own rules. So you might think like, okay, well, it's just going to generate like some code that is like, here's how you can look at an image and determine whether or not it's a dog. And it does do that, but it's not in any form that you can understand. So you can't go in there and be like, oh, your whisker algorithm is off. Like,
right.
You need to account for whiskers.
There is no whisker algorithm.
There is no,
really.
it's completely opaque.
Figured something else out.
Yeah. So it's kind of freaky. Like you get in these situations with like.
So it's not like editable.
No.
You can feed it more information and it can write its own code. But
yes, and it can get better, but it's. Yeah.
The code that belongs to the computer.
Yeah.
So what
really
language
weird.
is that?
Well, it can be in any language, but it's like, it's not like understandable in that sense.
Wow.
So what would you, if you wanted to get into that field, if you were listening to this and you're 19 or something and you're listening to this instead of going to your business classes or watching your business class videos online, what would be a step that you could take to start working with those problems in a real world kind of way?
Honestly, I would get into Swift, which is the programming language for Apple devices like iPhones and iPads. Because the great thing about that is you have that computer with you everywhere. It's really rewarding to, like, if you want to show someone what you did, it's like right there in your pocket and can be on their phone instead of like, oh, let's go over to the laptop and check it out.
Right.
And they're also just immensely powerful devices. Like, especially like the machine learning capabilities are just insane.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, you look at like the differences between like how Apple approaches phones and how Google does. Google has all your photos up in the cloud and they're doing all that stuff there, which is very powerful. And Google can do uncanny stuff like, hey, it's time to go to work. Like, how did you know I was going to work? Well, because on Thursdays you usually go and
I'm always watching you.
Right. Yeah, I'm always watching. So it's kind of not great for privacy. And Apple takes a very different approach where they don't do any server side like processing like that. So they build all those capabilities into the phone.
I did not.
So like if you have like photo library with 30,000 images, it goes through and uses machine learning to, like, my example was real. Like, you can go to your iPhone and say, show me photos of dogs. And your iPhone locally will have done all that machine learning to figure out these are dog pictures.
So each iPhone will have its own ununderstandable computer created code for that thing you didn't even ask it to do.
So that's fun.
Wow. That's amazing. So just to clarify, that is like if you found yourself, back in college, first or second year, losing interest in what you're doing, Swift, that's what you think.
That's a thing that you personally
would probably be getting into.
I would get into that.
Is that something that you have an interest in getting into now?
I do have an interest. There's only so much time, and it is a big undertaking. And I think it would take.
So there's not like a Swift Bible you can just read and.
I could, but it's one of those things where you've got to do it a while to get really good at it. So I'm sure I could learn enough to like mess around with it and have fun. But for me to be like a career option, I would need to dedicate a lot of time or have started a long time ago. So
it's more of an undertaking than learning PHP, you'd say?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like a whole other level of order of magnitude kind of?
Yeah. Huh. PHP is kind of it is looked down upon kind of in the programming language community. It was PHP is one of those kind of like garage, like amateur projects that had to grow up when people started using it for serious things.
For real?
It was not like
for newspaper websites.
Right.
It
was not architected to be, to make a lot of sense. So a lot of it is kind of weird and like, okay, that's an interesting way that works.
It just evolved in a certain
and it has grown up a lot.
Well, so that's an interesting question too. And this is the kind of thing I know just enough about to ask real dumb questions.
What's a computer?
What are we talking about? You described how, WordPress is sort of this nebulous community with maybe only like one official actual member and everybody else is sort of, working together to figure it out. Isn't there something that kind of exists like that for the actual programming language. There's like communities where you're figuring out how, we'll say this function does this thing. And I know like with, I don't know, HTML5 is a word that I know. It seems like there's new iterations. And how does that work? Is that something that you're a part of? Like the PHP itself, like the library?
Those standards.
So I'm not a part of, like, I haven't contributed to PHP to language at all. I do keep close tabs on how it's evolving and like all the new features. PHP does have like an organization where people can say like, here's this new feature I would like, and here's this big proposal, and people get feedback, and then they do an up or down vote.
And that's all like on a volunteer basis, right? Like those people generally
I believe so. I think largely that is the case.
So it's generally similar to what you described earlier with WordPress. There's a community of people.
Yeah, this has gotten a lot more common. So sometimes you'll see it's just completely community based, or you'll have something like React, which is a Facebook project. And so Facebook owns it, but there's still lots of contributors who are not at Facebook.
It's kind of like what they're doing with Libra, it sounds like to me. I think that's a much like larger scale thing, but they're saying we want this thing to exist. We're going to pay for a lot of it and hire a lot of the people, but we're not doing everything.
Right. And I mean, you can be cynical and say like, oh, free labor.
Yeah.
Great.
Works out well for you guys. Yeah.
Right. But also things that have community investment tend to last longer and to be better. And people feel like they're part of it and are part of it.
It kind of maybe also functions as a proving ground for, the people like yourself, the younger people or people just getting into the field. This is a way that you can get your feet wet and rub. I'm using a lot of weird body metaphors.
Get your feet wet, rub your elbows on your wet feet.
Rub your elbows on your feet.
But it's a way that you can kind of get out there and contribute, and put forward ideas or ways.
It sounds like it might be a reasonable like first step or early step for somebody to kind of contribute to these projects. And
absolutely. The best way to contribute to a project is documentation. So as you're learning something new, undoubtedly you're going to read the documentation and something is not going to make sense, or it's not going to be as clear as it could be. And
because it's also maintained by volunteers, basically, right?
Exactly. So
who are essentially in your exact situation at some other point and made some kind of documentation that worked for them, and now you maybe find a weakness.
Right. Yeah. Well, sometimes what happens is that the people who write the documentation are advanced users of the thing, and they not only don't have the perspective, but can't have the perspective of being a beginner. So they don't know what they know that other people don't know.
There's assumptions and things built in.
It's a weird kind of like
but not
code privilege where just technical privilege where you just know the thing really well and you can't put yourself in the shoes of someone who doesn't. So as someone who's coming to this with fresh eyes, and you find something that you're struggling on and the documentation is not helpful or misled you or is outdated, fixing that is a great first way to be like, hey, I'm making this better. I have like this attention to detail.
Is the documentation, like if you were to review and update documentation in that kind of way, are those changes also sort of tracked and voted on by the community in the way that software changes are?
Yes. Usually you'll find that documentation is also like on GitHub, where it's like, people say, here's this issue with this, and then people can discuss it. And then it's like,
here's how I documented what I think is wow.
So how do you, is step one, like create a GitHub account? You know what I mean? How do you, like if I was going to go do it right now?
Yeah, you go to GitHub.
Is GitHub pretty much where all this is happening?
Yeah, absolutely.
And is there I've never used GitHub. Is there a list within GitHub of like problems people need help with and you could just go attack one, or not really?
Well, you would have to find like a project first. So, I mean, generally you wouldn't just be like looking for a generic problem. You'd be looking for a problem in something that you want to learn or
So you're in the middle of learning something meaning, I guess. Well, so GitHub, this is where the WordPress documentation is, or for most projects, this is where the documentation is, or?
So parts of WordPress are in GitHub, parts are not, just for historical reasons.
But because WordPress precedes GitHub, so
by a lot.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So yeah, but lots of projects, like almost every project is going to be on GitHub, and their documentation is going to be there as well.
So that would be where you would be learning anyway, and then you, as you're learning it, you could see, I can add a little note here to explain.
Right. Like frequently, if you're on, like you go to the website for a software project, they're generally going to have like a link back to GitHub for where the code for like, the actual code, and then like the code for the documentation.
Okay.
I mean, it's not code. It's like text files. Generally.
Yeah. Okay. That sounds interesting because in that situation, as you just described, it sounds like a beginner is actually in a much better position to provide
for documentation.
Service.
Absolutely.
Then, yeah, that's kind of cool for somebody getting started.
In your role now as a CTO, when you're thinking about hiring younger people, maybe not younger, but hiring people to work underneath you in the organization, do you weigh things like GitHub and those sorts of things more heavily than you would weigh a degree? Or how do those things...
Like infinitely more.
Okay.
Let me think of the right word here. Infinitely.
Yeah. My vague understanding of computer science degrees and how they've sort of evolved is that they sort of started out kind of being invented by universities with no real idea of what needed to be taught, and that over time they have begun approaching more quickly, or just cut everything I just said. Over time,
I'm keeping
they're in flux now. So, that originally the CS degrees were maybe not that relevant to the real world in terms of problems that an actual person would solve, when they were out there in the field. But that's gotten a little bit better, but not fully better. So, are you saying that in your mind, the CS degree really has no value compared to actual demonstrated ability in a field?
It depends on what you're doing. So CS degrees are valuable for like a lot of the really low level coding. So like not just like writing like a web app or an iPhone app, but like the stuff that underpins that like kernel coding. Like
can I for 1 second just
low
to clarify?
Level,
can you?
So low level, not meaning unimportant, but low level, like closer to the actual kind of guts of the
so
computer.
you have like there's
the
the chip itself, and like the people are coding on that, and then you have like the operating system, and then you have software on top of that, and then you have software on top of that.
So in this context, higher level means
more abstract.
Yeah, more like what a person would understand.
Right, something that you could look at and it says print hello. Oh, that must print hello. And then the low level is ones and zeros.
Talking to a computer.
Yeah.
So not lower level like entry level or unimportant.
Yeah, I would say deeper level.
Like at a more, okay, cool.
Like so we still need those people. We still need people who are writing operating systems and, designing computers.
And that's the kind of thing, in your opinion, that an abstracted
CS degree.
Yes, they will absolutely teach you those fundamentals. Those are things that, like, if you just want to get into, application development, web development, you don't necessarily need to know all those things because those things are abstracted for you. I mean, you may find yourself sometimes delving down a little deeper into them, but you don't need like that. You don't need to build it from the ground up. You kind of take the reverse approach.
So people with these degrees, then are they like working for like Intel or something? Like who are these?
Yeah, Intel, Apple, Google, AMD.
So it's not the case that you have to have that kind of degree to work for those companies, but if you have one, you would probably, is that the case that you would probably be working for them?
Yes. Yes. You're going to be a chip designer or an operating system, like a kernel developer.
So if a person wanted to design apps or work on WordPress or those kinds of things, then...
No degree required.
Okay. Has anyone ever asked you in your life, like, do you have a degree?
No one has ever asked me. Let me underline it more. I don't have a high school diploma or a GED, and I've never been asked that.
Did you go to middle school?
Can we go?
Sometimes
Do you know anything?
It's the first time I've ever sat in a room.
Exactly. Sometimes those like those drop downs for your education level. Sometimes they say, "What is the highest education level that you have completed?"
And
I'm
like, put like sixth grade,
elementary school, like, and they say completed, but sometimes they say the highest level that you've completed, and then some college. So I have completed some college.
Haven't we all?
I guess
how did you become a college student without going? Having a high school diploma or a GED?
So
I don't know where you could do that.
Yeah. So I was homeschooled, which is the loophole.
Okay.
So I got into college based on my SAT scores, and then I had to take a bunch of SAT 2 individual subject.
Kind of prove your capability.
The bona fides,
So we might as well, we haven't really covered this at all.
I had other things I wanted to ask about the career stuff, but this
we'll come back to that. You're our first homeschooled whatever you are, guest.
I thought you were going to say something hateful.
Yeah, homeschooled
Weirdo,
yeah. What's the technical term? Oh, weirdo.
When you were homeschooled, were you homeschooled by your parents, or was it the kind of homeschooling where you just kind of don't actually go to a school, but you're schooled by other people?
It was first my parents, and then the latter, where there's like a correspondence course situation.
Is this was this initiated by your parents? They wanted to homeschool you, or
Yes.
how did that come to be? So that was from the beginning. You were
Completely from the beginning, yeah.
Do you have other siblings, and were you all homeschooled, if so?
We were to various degrees. With the younger ones, they started sending them to other schools in like middle school.
How many siblings do you
kind of burnt out. I have 6.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
So they got, as you said, burnt out. They're just tired.
Yeah.
There's a lot of teaching.
Yeah. It was rough for my mom. She had to like essentially go from like first grade through middle school when like the math starts. Like if you ever go back, like I am now in the position as a parent, like helping with middle school and high school math. And it's like, okay, you forget a lot.
Yeah.
So she had to do that
this
journey
normally.
several times.
Yeah. Wow.
So you mentioned before that they were both in the medical field. Right?
Yes.
Did your parents, were they working full-time while educating you, or?
My father was, my mother was working part-time. She had a pretty sweet gig where she only had to work like every second Saturday.
Do you?
And, well, I imagine given the field that they were in, they must have had like pretty strong scientific minds, mathematical minds. You know, they had to have already for themselves a pretty solid background in a lot of general fields, you know, to be.
Yeah,
what they
I would
were
say,
professionally.
yeah, my biological education was interesting because we didn't have a lab, so we couldn't do like the more advanced chemistry and stuff. Like a rat got in the house and was like swatted to death with a broom, and so we did a dissection.
Oh my god!
Whoa.
Yeah,
A rat got in the house.
All right.
What did that rat pick the wrong house? Yeah. Oh, good science. So
Wow.
what?
Do you know was there a specific motivator where your parents decided we want to homeschool our kids?
I think it's a mixture, partly like religious reasons and just like they thought the quality of education was not great. Like they just wanted to have more of a say.
They wanted to.
I wonder, do you think that played a role in their acceptance of your career decision, you know, when you were so young? In other words, you'd kind of already been sort of off the beaten path. And all.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, at a certain point when you're homeschooled, you are being self-taught, especially like with those correspondence courses where like they give you the packets, they give you the books.
And also for the audience, like this is kind of pre-Wikipedia, pre-YouTube,
Oh, yeah.
pre all those things. So
Yeah.
you
You actually have to open the
you had the
packet.
library, you had this course, and
we just set a world book, encyclopedias.
World
like,
Book.
Oh
I used to
yeah.
have that. Yeah.
Like the gold leaf.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Classy.
Yeah.
High end.
I used to like pressing the covers together and then like pulling them apart to feel like the
Gold edges. Yeah.
paper would sever.
No one listening to
And for
this
the
knows
audience,
what
paper is a thing.
Exactly.
You hold in your hands.
That your grandparents used to really value.
So, do you? I'm asking this as a parent as well. Do you feel like, you know, having been homeschooled, is that something you ever wanted to do with your kids, or?
It's not, but I think it also changed how I view like the scope of education.
Mhm.
So I definitely see it as, so like, you know, being homeschooled, we would try and like work education into everything.
Mhm.
And it gives you that flexibility. So you can like
Yeah.
go on a road trip and like learn about Civil War by going to like all the battlefields,
Yeah.
stuff like that.
and arguably learn about those things in a very direct way that maybe a classroom.
Yeah, probably a more memorable
Yeah.
and poignant way.
I would say so.
Sure.
Yeah. It's
So-
funny. But well,
Oh yeah, no, go ahead.
I was just going to say that it's like a weird side effect of the need to educate everybody. That the point of education is to teach you about the world, but school kind of a lot of times forces you to just be sequestered away from the world and kind of
Right.
think about it like in a different way. As you said, ideally we'd all be kind of learning stuff all the time, and ideally a big part of that would be driven by our own actual interest in it or our need to understand something. And traditional school can certainly kind of remove these things from each other, where you're just in a room learning something and it might not be super clear why you are doing it.
doesn't
or
feel like
why
right.
everybody. Yeah. Whereas, as you said,
And
driving
it
around
just
the
and
battlefields.
it's in one ear out the
That's a
other.
very-
So
yeah.
there's this interesting phenomenon whereby humans segment knowledge by physical location. So if you've ever been like oh, I need to go get the laundry in the other room. You go into the other room and like, why did I walk in here? No idea. You walk back to the original room. Oh,
I left my knowledge of that over there.
yeah. So like the idea that like, all your knowledge is like in this one tiny box
Yeah.
and then you leave it. And
If you ever need to know something, you gotta drive back to your school and like, all right.
yes, it's all coming back.
It is really.
But yeah, definitely like,
So it
just
changed your
being,
perspective on your
it just,
education.
But you also,
Hands-on.
as you said, your kids are not homeschooled, so it's not.
they're not, but I have the position that, school is not limited to what happens. Education is not limited to what happens at school. Education and school are not the same.
That learning goes beyond the boundaries of the
Yeah.
building that you
And
go
so,
to every day.
what was it like for you then to go to college and maybe for the first time, like sit in a room with a bunch of people and hear
Or not,
some-
I guess it didn't happen.
Or when you did that.
Well, so I had a bit of a soft landing. So for 12th grade, I just went to a local community college and took courses there. So that was helpful. That was a very like soft entry
Sure.
into the classroom, and also just gave me a bit of a leg up for actually when I went to actual university.
Do you consider yourself to be like a reader by nature?
Yeah.
And where do you?
Yeah, like my parents had to. I don't know where it came from, but probably since I was 7, it would be like me with a flashlight and them telling me like, no, really, stop reading. I know it sounds weird, but stop reading.
It's very late.
Cease bettering yourself.
Well, the reason I thought of it is you mentioned that giant PHP book, that you bought, and that seems to me like the act of a reader, that you would go to the book first to say, I have this problem I need to solve. Surely someone has like written a bound up set of pages that would teach me how to.
Not even just like searching for specific knowledge. Like I literally read encyclopedia
The
A
quest for
through
knowledge.
G, I think, just cover to cover. Just
Wow.
H just didn't do it for you.
I ran out of
Who
steam.
needs to know about that? Yeah.
So that's interesting in light of what you were saying earlier with HTML for Dummies. When you were 12 or 13, do you remember your first impressions of like the internet, like as a homeschooled kid? Did your parents have a computer and a dial-up?
Yeah, so we were online before the internet. So
How'd you do that?
so there were services. So there's a service called Prodigy in the 80s.
Huh.
And so we got our first, what they call it, the IBM computer,
TRS-80 or
the
something?
PS2.
PS2. I didn't know that was a thing before
That's
the
the
other
one we used to
PS2
play
later on.
video games on at
Yeah,
the Smith's house. Anyway, please continue.
Yeah, so we got one of those probably 1988, and it had a very slow modem, and you could dial into this service called Prodigy.
Yeah.
And it would give you
Like
email
bulletin boards,
and
right?
like bulletin boards, like discussion boards, weird games.
Wow.
So you would do that? You would get on the
Yeah.
computer and just kind of
And did your
poke around?
parents view that as part of your education, like as a key part of your development?
Yeah, absolutely. Like my first,
It's very forward thinking.
So that wasn't even like on a color screen, right? Probably.
that was not a
Was it
color
like
the
screen.
green
That
and
was
black or something?
green, as I recall. Yeah.
Yeah, that was monochrome. And then later we got color. And like
Monochrome internet is an idea I can't even
It's like powered by a
so
steam engine or something. There's like a guy shoveling coal in the back of your
there
computer.
was no mouse.
Wow.
Yeah. And eventually got color, got a little faster. And like my first, so my impression of the internet was the watching the election in 1992. And we watched that on the computer. And
Streaming video?
no,
I was going to say, like,
no, it's just like,
you watch
it was just like a map, like a
refreshing-
very low resolution map.
Oh, wow.
And you just watch the data come in, like hear the numbers, and the states would change color.
Wow.
And I just remember, like, as compared to like 88, you'd have to watch TV and then
Just wait for
for the word to come down from on high that like here's what has happened, and it was like hours.
And this
late.
was
And
like
I just
direct.
I was looking at the screen. I'm like, I'm plugged into the actual data. This is incredible.
Wow.
Was that like an important moment, you think,
Yeah.
for like the realizing the power of this?
Absolutely.
And was that, and you walked right out and bought HTML for Dummies?
I got to go.
This is going to be huge.
Nah, it was probably
It would be a few years
it was
before.
a couple years after that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if we kind of tie all that into when you told your parents, look, I don't think college is the right thing for me at this time, kind of looking at it from their perspective, it's not as though you being self-educated was a new idea for them. It's not as though you being into the internet was a new idea for them.
Yeah.
So
I don't think it was.
they
very
probably were
surprising.
kind of like, oh, okay, like
yeah,
we know he's good at this. Like he's been kind of doing this for 10 or 15 years already before.
I'd always been like fiercely independent, and yeah, it was not a surprise.
Did your other siblings pursue similar, maybe not similar careers in the sense of technology and that kind of thing, but other sort of
Non-traditional
self-employed,
paths or something?
non-traditional things, or did they go into other kinds of?
No, they've gone into one brother who's in the military, I have another brother who is an airline pilot. Actually, weirdly, at the same time, they're both captains in a different sense of the word.
Yeah.
So,
So two captains.
yeah, I wish I had a sibling who went
like a captain
into
of a hockey
like a
team.
nautical or
Yeah.
and hockey. Wow,
Captain
so
of a
many
ship.
different captains.
All my siblings are captains.
One's crunch. One's
Terrible. Anyway, so
Airline pilot, military,
Like physical therapy, and then some other ones who are still kind of figuring it
figuring out, but generally more traditional roles of going to a
Yes.
school, getting some kind of degree or
Absolutely.
certificate.
So are you the only one then who started college and did not finish it in your family?
Yes, so far.
So many questions. So earlier, you said you were homeschooled, and when it came time to apply to college, was it just sort of like understood like the next step after this is college, or did you feel like you kind of chose to go down that path, or that was just like what else would you do besides college?
I don't remember thinking that it was optional.
Yeah,
It just seemed like the next.
Well, especially if you started going to community college classes in 12th grade, your parents, I think, were clearly thinking, okay, we have to like start moving him into the
Right.
So that's interesting then too, because certainly a lot of our listeners, feel a lot of pressure connected to standardized tests, and I think a lot of that comes from the environment they're in at school. But you were at home. Did you feel pressure taking those tests? What was your impression of that?
I mean, I was nervous for sure because like testing is like literally you're being judged
Yeah, tested,
by your performance.
Yeah,
right.
Very weird environment.
Yeah.
I don't know if I felt pressure because I didn't like have the peer group who like were all fighting to get into the same schools and
Did you have a score like I need to get this so I can get into?
Yeah, were you aware of
UF or
a target, or
wherever?
you just
Were
wanted to do
you-
the best that you could do?
So I wanted to go to the University of Florida, which is where I did go. And I think at the time they were looking for people who had like, I think it was like a 1250 to 1300. This is back when it was 1600.
Well,
It is,
it
by the way,
again.
they moved it back to
Oh, they moved it back.
Yeah.
Wow. Everything old is new.
Time flies.
Everything.
everything old is
And
new
vice
again.
versa,
Yeah.
yeah.
that
So
was
so
just-
I had
So you had a rough
I wanted
idea
to be
around
yeah
1300 was the goal.
yeah. I took it. I think I took it 3 times. I think starting in I think I first took it in 9th grade.
Cool. And again, I'm guessing that was your parents' idea to sort of get you used to the.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's one of these things like some kids just sometimes it's not the material, it's like how to take a test.
Yeah,
Sure.
That's a whole other component to the
Yeah.
experience.
That's a large portion of what we teach people is really just how to do it and why it's weird and unique. as
There's
opposed
this amazing thing I found online, which is a test, and the subject of the test is the test.
Huh.
So it asks questions about the test.
About the questions that
And
it's
it has weird logical like
That's
things like, the answer to this other question is like
Yeah.
it's hard
Like
to describe. But
self-referential.
it is all self-referential
Yeah.
and it's a big puzzle that you can figure out.
Almost sounds
But
like
it
a crossword puzzle.
I
meets
wanna
a
look at
kind
standardized-
of, but
Yeah,
it uses
sort of.
that skill that you need in test taking of like eliminating the bad answers and then kind of reasoning,
Well, and reading super carefully. That's
reading
one of the
super
things
carefully.
almost every problem comes down to. Get
Yeah.
emails from our readers and everything, and most issues are just really understanding what it means to actually. And as a programmer, reading
Yes.
carefully is kind of maybe more than any other
Yeah.
profession.
But it's also not a skill that most high school students are encouraged to develop.
not at all. Yeah, in our
Right.
experience,
Carefully and not interpreting
it's more of
those kinds of things.
What do you like? If you're an English teacher trying to stimulate conversation in a classroom, you will take any comment.
Right.
If somebody has,
long
this
as it's
made me
offered
feel
in good
about
faith.
this way about whatever.
Yeah.
And in a discussion, you can explore that, but on a test or it's just, this is what the words say. And that's
Right.
what really counts. in this
My
situation.
grandfather, the engineer, I think he was the first person to kind of show me like, computers and programming. He was teaching me like spreadsheets back in the day.
Wow.
This was related to his work that he did.
I'm not sure if it was related, but he,
Okay.
he knew about
Skill of
spreadsheets
his,
and
yeah.
programming from his job.
That's so, to me, I mean, maybe I'm just like totally off base, but that seems so ahead of its time.
Oh yeah,
And
he
your
was way
parents,
ahead.
like all of it.
That's
Yeah,
really interesting.
He was,
impressive.
yeah, he
really
was-
interesting.
And yeah, he had like the original Macintosh computer.
And how old were you?
When he was teaching me this stuff, I was probably 10.
Also, I can't imagine being 10 years old and caring even a little bit about a spreadsheet. Like,
Well,
I just can't see it for me.
it was interesting. He set up puzzles essentially.
That's
so cool.
really
And so he typed in this formula in the spreadsheet, and he asked me to predict what the answer would be.
Huh.
And I went through and I did the math, and I said it's 2,500, and he goes, wrong. I'm like, why is that wrong? I go through again. I'm like, no, it's 2,500. He goes, it's 2,500 what? So just like that, being carefully, like that precision.
Wow.
So close, but doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
But listen to
He was like, this tiny thing is wrong, so it is completely wrong. That's how engineering works.
Wow, that's also
which is
something
true,
we teach
and also how
kids all the
testing
time.
works.
Yeah.
So yeah, if A is a little bit right, it's totally wrong.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, I think my parents wanted me to like have the experience of taking the test so that I was like familiar with all that, and less of my performance was related to taking a
in your
test,
place,
and
doing
more
it.
was the material.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really smart.
That
of
makes a
them.
lot of
It
sense.
was like a lot of the questions, I don't know if it's still the case, but at the time was you kind of just need to learn the types of questions, like the comparisons,
The,
this is to this. As
Yeah. So a lot of the questions, partly for you, partly for the audience, a lot of the questions that would have been on the test when you took it at that time are no
The analogies are gone. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Analogies are gone.
they were on it when
many of
we
the
took it,
things
but they're gone.
that someone, I'm about the same age as you, someone our age would have thought of as like the core difficult parts of the SAT don't really, shouldn't say don't really, they don't exist anymore. And the test has been sort of stripped down to
The reading comprehension is reading passages
math.
and answering questions.
Yeah,
about
reading
that.
comprehension is essentially the same as it was. It looks a little bit different,
Yeah, but the
basically the same.
Yeah.
And the math, they took out like quantitative comparison and a lot of the things that made it super hard and weird. Not that it's not hard.
it's still
now, but
definitely
it's hard in a
unusual, but
yeah.
it's less obviously unusual. A kid can take it and feel like it's basically still a classroom math test,
which is
which
actually
is how they
in a
get you.
way-
Yeah, it's not really like that.
right,
Yeah.
because it's not.
And then there's the English component, which has
Yeah.
like a grammar aspect.
but it
of
looks less
so it wasn't
off-putting. Like
there.
when you just look at it
Yeah.
without any real idea what's going on behind the scenes, it looks more.
But that is almost worse.
more approachable, you think?
yeah,
because you don't realize you have to have
but it's actually
mindset.
not-
Anyway, so
yeah. Anyway, whatever.
yeah, obviously we could go on about that way too long. So
So you took it
yeah.
3 times.
3 times.
And again, it sounds kind of like not a ton of pressure from your family in terms of
Certainly not
Gosh,
the first time, because I was a freshman. It's like, this is just
Just do it.
Just
See what
to
happens.
take it.
Yeah.
I may have actually taken there's like a PSAT. Is that the thing?
PSAT.
Yeah, I think I took that too.
Okay.
I'm not sure if that was 8th grade, or
the standard time to take it would be 11th grade, but sometimes you also can take that earlier.
I think I took that earlier.
Yeah, you
too.
can to see how you do in the 11th grade one. And then you mentioned you took the SAT subject tests as well.
Yeah, I took probably at least 6 of those.
Really? So just specifically because you were homeschooled?
Just to show.
Yeah,
I
so
have this
the
body.
University of Florida required that because I didn't have like a transcript.
Yeah.
So they had just the SAT score, but they kind of wanted more. So they want like an essay, and then they want
Sure.
a certain number of tests.
Do you remember vaguely what scores you got on the subject tests?
I have no idea. The individual subject tests.
Yeah.
I don't. I couldn't. I know one of them was like Latin. I took one, and there's an English one. I think there's a math one.
There's like more advanced math. Yeah. Literature.
Yeah, like more advanced. I don't remember those as well.
On the topic of math, because clearly you have like a very analytical mind, did you sit at any point with a math textbook when you were like learning math, through, through your homeschooling? Did you sit with a math textbook and do math in the way that somebody might do it in a classroom, or was there a different way of learning math for you?
Yeah, no, it was textbook.
Okay.
I
Basically,
mean, like when I was younger, it was like abacus and like
an abacus.
and like the little bean counter things.
Adding
and-
little blocks and like objects and stuff.
Right. Yeah, and there's something with like almost like connects, kind of like
There's like little cubes that add up to like a giant cube. and
Yeah, like that
things
one
like
represents a
Yeah.
1, and then you
1,
make
10,
the
100,
10s.
yeah.
We were at a conference like a few months ago, and there was like a startup pitch fest kind of thing. And one of the startups was apparently actually a well-established company, I want to say in Japan. And it was an abacus-based like math education for kids. And I was like, I didn't even know that was a thing anymore. And they showed videos of these auditoriums. Remember this? Of kids
Oh, yeah. You don't forget that.
So
That
excited
was
to do
insane.
like abacus stuff, and like then
super
they could do
complicated
it like
calculations.
on their fingers without the abacus in front of them because they were visualizing the abacus. All I
And
took
those
away
kids
from
are
it
just
is-
like shaking their hands back and forth.
Yeah,
and
like-
they
yeah,
need something to them.
minority reporting the answer.
They are, yeah, with nothing. But it's like a whole auditorium of kids doing this, and it's incomprehensible observing it, and then they come up with some
takeaway I
9-digit
could
answer.
have from it was I have to teach my kid how to use an abacus because
Yeah,
that's
it
amazing.
seems really cool that that's
So is that,
invented
like-
millennia ago and still
Yeah.
somehow relevant.
How long into your math education did you use those kinds of things?
Probably, I remember where I was, and we were there in 1990, so I was 7 to 8. We're certainly using it at that point.
That's cool. Was there a day where it was like, okay, no more abacus now? We're doing.
I think it just got
just
phased
kinda-
out. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
So when you were taking these tests, do you remember having a sense of concern about getting admitted, or you kind of felt like, you were pretty much where you needed to be?
I had some concern, but like I did well enough on like even my like the first or second time I took it that like
Felt pretty
You felt
probably
pretty
be
solid.
good, but I wanted to get like the third one to really lock it in.
And was there, what made you pick UF?
Cost for sure. I was not like my parents had set aside some money, but go out of state to a private
Yeah,
school,
blow
you
that
would
very
like
quickly.
blow through that in
Yeah.
2 years.
Sure.
Like my scores were high enough to qualify for the Florida Bright Futures Scholarship, which is funded
Yeah.
by the Florida Lottery,
Yeah,
which gave me 100% tuition coverage
based on your GPA and scores.
based on the SAT score.
Oh yeah, I guess.
Well,
you have a
GPA wouldn't
even?
exist for you.
Wouldn't
Right?
exist
Yeah,
for me.
okay. Just
normal sense.
all right.
So yeah, just on that and plus money for books. So that was super helpful.
Was that your parents' influence to care about the financial aspect so much, or was
No,
it
they
your own?
they would have supported me if I was also considering Notre Dame, but UF has a good business school, reasonably close to home, so it's like a 3-hour drive, but
So-
still like enough that I would feel like on my own.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you were aware of like a lot of, maybe starting very recently, applicants to colleges are thinking hopefully more about the cost. I remember when I was in high school being specifically told not to think about that. And it's not like we went to some super fancy.
Yeah.
People shouldn't have to worry about money. Like they should have been telling us.
Right. Yeah. Our
Consider
guidance
the cost,
counselors
consider
specifically
everything.
said, like, just get into
But
the
people
best
would
school
come
you
around
can.
and say, "Yeah,
Worry
go to
about
that
it
school,"
later.
Worry about how you're going
and
to
don't worry about the money.
Yeah,
Like that exact phrase.
that is terrifying.
Which I don't
It's
personally-
hard.
I am
think
so
it's
I'm like I feel hashtag blessed that I did not do that.
Exactly. That you were not in that position. So it's interesting to hear that you were on your own, and you were in a very different
ahead of the
environment.
curve once more, but thinking of yourself.
In your own home with your own
should-
family.
I honestly lucked
other
out on
influences.
that.
Yeah.
I don't think I had like thought forward like, okay, I could have this debt in 20 years sort of situation.
Just more of an intuitive.
Um,
This costs less. It makes sense. Why not? Yeah.
When you were going to those community college classes, did you think at all about just doing that, getting your AA or whatever through that? Or was it always just, okay, this is what I'm doing now, and then eventually I'm going to?
No, I think by that point I had set my sights on 4-year degree.
And you mentioned-
which I, of course, did not get.
You mentioned obviously that you were interested in UF's good business school and that you ended up not loving it. What pointed you in that direction in the first place, do you think? Like, why did you even go down that path of targeting?
Yeah, where did business come from as an
school?
idea?
I really struggle to trace the origin of that.
Huh.
I thought it sounded like I would go into business and I would get like a serious and well-paying job. And I thought I would solve interesting problems and I would find it compelling.
Mhm.
And again, I did at first,
You're right.
but not so much later when it got more abstract.
That's so interesting, isn't it? Like, at one point in your life, that seemed like a really important thing to do, and now you can't even remember why it seemed that way.
Yeah. Where did that come from? Yeah.
Yeah.
And so many people just like sweat that decision and they go in a completely different direction.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, ends up not mattering.
Jumping back to some.
Well, I was just going to say, kind of on that topic, when you, in your role now as the CTO of this company, and maybe when you might have worked with other people in your previous sort of consulting life, when the topic of college came up, if it ever did, or when you're considering an applicant, we talked a little bit about how like CS degrees are not super relevant for you and your decision making. Are there particular fields, like do you ever get applications from someone who majored in geography or something, and then you like, are there other fields of study and or 4-year degrees that while not actually giving the technical knowledge necessary for your job, that give some kind of like useful background that you've found. I'm not phrasing that well, but do you get what I'm trying to say? Like, are there other fields of study that might actually be relevant in your life, even if it's not CS specifically?
Not that I can really think of. There are definitely skills, but those don't necessarily track one to one. They're not correlated to certain degrees. So like communication skills are the biggest thing I look for, but there's nothing about any sort of degree. Like you could literally have a degree in communications and make a great like PR person or something. But yeah.
So how do you evaluate that then? If you want,
through conversations, and especially conversations through different media. So face to face versus on the phone, like like video chat versus in Slack, like a text conversation, and just seeing how how quickly can they type, how well can they phrase an idea, how efficient and effective are they in communication? In that communication.
So if you are going to hire someone, assuming just some random job that's like vaguely related to things you've had to hire people for in the past, not for any particular position. If we're talking about communication skills, documentation skills, and like existing software chops, can you rank the importance of those three things? Are they kind of all important?
I would say communication is probably the highest. So sometimes, like if you're hiring someone and they're just new in the job market, they're not going to have a decade of experience. Sometimes they do. Sort of shocking. Like, how is this mathematically possible? So sometimes you just need to not base it on what they know, but what their capacity for learning is. Because my skills are not at all what they were even 4 years ago.
Sure.
And you just need to be constantly evolving. So instead of being like, I need you to be here, you look at their trajectory. What their potential is.
Sorry.
And the communication skills piece of that is the hardest to pick up, I'm guessing.
Communication.
Ready.
Yeah, that's the hardest thing to teach. I think. Like you can teach all sorts of technical skills if someone is bright and open-minded.
Well, and now that I'm thinking about it too, you can Google all sorts of technical skills, but you can't really.
You would be surprised how much of my job is being really good at Googling the answer.
Right. It makes sense if you have an infinite repository.
I mean, other people have solved almost every problem that someone else has to solve, right? I mean, there's nothing super new. Not that it never happens, but most problems.
Yeah. Why would you be solving every problem from first principles?
Right. Yeah.
Look at the prior art and see what other people have done, and then.
Yeah. But again, you can't really Google how do you?
How do I chat
with somebody? Or you can, I guess, but it's a harder.
Harder. It would harder to implement.
More of a
for sure
lifetime of building a skill.
Actually, it reminds me of a friend of mine. He was told by people that his online communication was a bit too gruff. He was just very serious and kind of negative.
Not enough emojis.
Wow, you got stole the punchline.
So start throwing in some hearts.
So he would come and be like, this is terrible. And then so someone approached him and he really took it to heart. He's like, okay, I need to improve this. So I checked some code in and he goes, this is terrible. You should not have checked this in. I'm like, oof, wow. And then 2 minutes later, he sends me a smiley face.
That is kind of the perfect solution.
Communicate, but the delay was just
right. Wait for it.
Incoming smiley face.
Yes.
Wow.
So in the future, I would manually append the smiley face to everything he said.
He just he's smiley facing me.
Have always taken literature and those kinds of things really seriously. I would like to write, novels someday. And I view that as it's just something I care a lot about. And it was super painful to start putting smiley faces and things into my communication, but it's the only way to get across. Do you know what I mean?
Things.
I get why they exist because without them,
in certain contexts,
it's very hard to express that you're saying something in a friendly, playful way.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've heard that for certain communications, you have a family member ask you hey, can you help me out with this? And whether or not you put a period at the end of your answer massively affects
or capitalizing the
or capitalizing where I want to be capital YES period and they just hear yes. Right. Even though in my mind I'm like yes
Yeah.
But if I did
So I
lowercase,
say that. Yeah.
no period,
Does that matter?
Yeah.
But it does.
smiley face, unnecessary exclamation point,
Right.
Yeah.
it would come across so much
Suddenly it's
better.
totally-
So,
Yeah,
so
I do a lot of thumbs up at the end of something to just be like, everything's fine.
Yeah.
You say like a 3 or 4 word phrase.
you have to control for the medium. So like
Right.
you can let loose a little bit in text, although I do not. I am one of those people who uses a proper M and N dashes in my text.
Me
messages.
too. That you even know what an M dash is as opposed to an N dash. Already like, yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
The N dash is the worst one because like people never know it, and like even if you do use it, like you talk about the Smith Jones wedding and use the N dash, no one's going to appreciate that. They're never even going to know.
Nobody cares.
I know, but
Neither Smith nor Jones is
No.
interested in
nor the
that.
rest of the world.
Wow, that's funny.
So then do you intentionally set up interviews in these 3 different media, like as part of the process of
Yeah, I try and mix that in so I can see like, ooh, like there's the concept of the bad texter.
Yeah.
Like those people who like if you call them on the phone, they're there. Yeah. And you text them, you don't get a reply for a day.
I have a brother like that.
Yeah.
He's also a bad call receiver as well. Yeah.
What is your medium?
Communication, you say. Yeah. So you're kind of looking out for that to see, can I reach this person? Can I?
Yeah, like it's just a functional thing. Like it's not going to work if like
You're right.
you
Yeah.
can't communicate the way that we communicate.
Yeah. And so do you, if you're considering a person for a job, is step 1, like you mentioned, like their GitHub page, do you look at that first? Do you set up like interviews first? Like what's the first thing?
I set up an interview. Generally they'll submit some info. So I'll look at the background. I'll see like, what skills do they say they're proficient in, which is semi-useful signal because like the worst one honestly is WordPress, because people will say like skills, WordPress. That can mean they do what I do, or that can mean I have installed it, or worse,
I've published
I've
blog
used
posts.
it. I published. I guess published a blog post one time.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. WordPress would be.
So yeah,
It's kind of like the rat that wandered into your house, had no idea what was
WordPress, huh?
the person who says WordPress to you. Oh,
We got
really?
a few questions for you. Yeah.
So yeah, those lists of skills, they can lead you to like know what questions to ask during the interview, but they don't.
Is it, I would imagine a large part of the issue is like people overselling their technical skills, but does it ever come up that people undersell?
Yeah.
Is it a problem?
Absolutely comes up that people undersell. Yeah, I've had these weird interviews, or even like after the interview, like saying like for like a contractor, like, is this little job that we have a good fit for you? And I've had people downplay it who like they were correct in what all the words they're saying were correct. Like, I don't feel like I'm the best person for this because I have no experience in this, but I've like seen their work in other areas, and I'm like, I know.
You think they could have?
I know both the things. I'm like,
it.
if you can do this, you can do this,
Yeah.
even though it's new to you. I trust you.
So the skills, but not the confidence. It
Yeah.
seems. Yeah.
Yeah, and women are definitely underplay. Like
As a
on
general
average,
rule,
on average,
if a
yes.
female applicant has said that they know something, they probably know
Yeah,
more than what
they've done a study like this, and like so, if you list here are the 10 things that you need for this job, men will apply when I'm gonna get this wrong, but I think it's like when they have 60% of the skills, and women will apply once they have 90. Like,
And you found this
just like
in
as a
your-
general rule
in your
terms of
experience.
human
Yeah.
psychology or whatever.
yeah.
Huh. That's really interesting.
So I mean, you can go by what they say, like they can do, but you need to get details. So not just like, hey, can you do this? Yes. Okay. How would you do that? How would you like show me how you would approach this problem?
I would imagine if I were in your position, I would prefer for someone to admit their ignorance of something if they were ignorant of a particular area, rather than trying to fake that they have an
Yes.
answer for it. Is that how you feel? Or
Absolutely. Because you can always say like, I appreciate your honesty, but I have faith in you. I think I've seen what you can do. I
Yeah.
think you can do this. And I mean, if you can't, just let me know after, before you're like 20 hours into it.
right? You can, yeah.
But then it's worse when you're like, okay, how's the project going? And they're like, oh yeah, just one more week. And then you finally see it and you're like, whoa.
Yeah.
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 Way more than a week away from.
So you mentioned, that the CS degree means essentially nothing to you because of what you're doing. Is that would you say generally the case in your field? Like if somebody's applying to a job with someone else,
If we had a
CTO
panel
somewhere
of like
else,
20 CTOs here, would they all be like, yeah, I don't really care about a CS degree that
or
much?
is that more
in
of
your
a person to person?
It would depend on the job. I think they would agree that for a large percentage of like the technical jobs, it's not necessary. Again, it's like the really deep down,
Sure.
at the kernel level stuff. You do need those fundamentals, otherwise you can't do the job.
Right.
But the other stuff, you can completely learn on the fly. And it's one of these things that it just changes so much. Like some of the foundational things change, but like even like as a doctor, like there's lots of things that change, but like the fundamentals of the human body are the same. Like, the same organs, and be like this 1 year, like, oh, the future is we're going heartless this year. Like,
We're going to try that out.
yeah, we're going to try that out. Okay, well, that's a thing.
Back to the drawing board.
Yeah, tech is just, it changes
Excellent
so much.
metaphor,
Yeah.
In your current role as a CTO and also dealing with contractors and stuff, how did you learn to manage those people, find them, all of that? Where'd that skill set come from?
I would say it's one of the things I'm still working on the most. Yeah, just like I have lots of other friends who either run companies, they're either CTOs or CEOs. I just listen to their advice on how they interview and how they look for candidates, what matters and what doesn't. So like the importance of online communication, if that's how your company works.
Sure.
So like this one friend, when he does interviews, he schedules, I think 3, and one is phone, and then literally the second interview is all via text on purpose. Like they both are on full connections. They could just be chatting, but he purposely does it on text because because
that's how he's going to be talking to people most of the time when they're hired.
And then the next interview is, I think, on text, but with multiple people, not just a one-on-one
Group chat.
But like the other managers are in there too. And so there's like, it's like,
wow,
man, it is the 21st century. I did not know that. Really
and 2 of those managers are AI systems.
Yeah, exactly. You got to figure out which 2 it is. So when you mentioned earlier, I think that you did 13 years of consulting. Do you count the start of that as that point where I guess you accepted the 133% raise from that company?
Yeah, it's about that time.
And then,
well, that's when I dropped out of school, which I guess was probably about a year later.
So you were working for that company for about a year. I mean, you just have to so much clarify.
Yeah.
Were you working like as an employee or
no, not as an employee,
like a contractor?
In fact, almost all of, literally this year was the first year that I worked as an actual employee. So like
opposed to a consultant.
Yeah, one of my first jobs, I worked quasi as an employee, but as a Canadian company and just the international tax law. So technically I was a contractor, even though I was mostly full-time.
So you were at this point still holding out hope for your biology degree, I guess, for another year and working.
Yeah, but I was starting to lose hope on get disenchanted with that as well.
Were you only working for this company, or were you also doing like side gigs and sort of staying active in that world?
Yeah, I had a bunch of side gigs going on, just kind of a spattering of people who would throw me work.
And was it a combination of just I'm making money doing other stuff, I don't have time, I don't care about biology anymore, and I'm gonna drop out, and pursue this other?
I wasn't finding any joy in it. It seemed like work, and then the stuff I was doing as a hobby didn't seem like work. But then I realized that it could be
other
a
people
career.
think it's work.
Yes. If people are paying you for it, it's working.
So during that period, those 13 years, can you describe, I don't know if it was very different from the beginning or toward the end, like what's a normal day or normal week for you, just get up in the morning and...
Yeah, it's probably changed. My habits used to be really terrible in terms of
work habits.
When I would work, I would find I would want to work more at night. I'd find myself shifting. And it can be kind of rough when you're setting your own hours to maintain that structure, because it's all on you to impose it. Yeah. But I would say in recent years, I've become more of a predictable day creature.
By your own choice, it just makes... Is that part of being a parent, you think, has influenced that, or...?
Yeah, definitely. When I was first a parent, it influenced it in the wrong way, because I would just take the night shift with the infant. So I would be up there coding with,
Yeah.
one hand, rocking the baby.
One-handed coding. That's nice. Yeah. So then at a certain point that shifted and you wanted to make sure you had.
Yeah, I think I just when I hit 30 or something, like I just couldn't do the all night coding binges regularly.
So in any given day, would you say some days you're looking for your next gig with someone, some days you're working on a huge project that needs to be done next week, or what was like kind of a...
Right. I didn't spend a lot of time hunting. I was very lucky in that like I have a lot of work coming.
You had enough of a standing that people were interested. Or...
Right. I'd say I was pretty bad at this for a while, where I would bounce around from like whatever the largest fire was, you know?
Yeah. Okay. Most urgent situation.
Or what? Well,
now.
Not even the biggest fire, but just sometimes the brightest light.
Okay.
If that makes sense. Like the most like, the newest, like, hey, I was wondering if we could. I'm like, okay, well, there's this very important thing I'm working on, maybe even for the same client.
Yeah.
But like, ooh, here's this shiny new problem.
This thing sounds cooler.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like intellectually stimulating, basically?
Yeah, I am definitely a sucker for an interesting problem.
Like a cool challenge to try to figure out a solution for. Huh. So then your normal, if there was a normal day, would be sort of prioritizing. I have X number of projects and I kind of know where each one is and I kind of have to figure out which one needs me the most right now, balanced with what do I actually feel like doing the most right now?
Right. And what is my energy level? And do I even feel like working today? So yeah, that flexibility can be rough.
That's another question. Yeah.
I found it is way less stressful now that I have a more predictable schedule and I time block out stuff. And now as I'm, transitioning to spending probably 90% of my time as an employee, and I still have some like clients on retainer that I'm still servicing, but now my time block is mostly towards that, my employer now.
Yeah. And are those more like traditional hours that you'd come?
Yeah, thankfully they're very flexible. So sometimes I work from home. I have an office in Tampa that I sometimes work from, and then sometimes I go down to Sarasota. It's about an hour away, and work at their office.
As the CTO, do you decide for yourself what your priorities are, or does the CEO give you that, or how does that work? Because you're higher up than just sort of a normal hourly employee. So like, who's deciding what you're going to do? It's
generally, it's between me and the CEO determining, like sometimes you'll say this is very important for, a business reason, for, money or this new contract we signed. And on the technical side, I have a huge amount of leeway. Obviously, I listen to like my programmers, see what their input is. But if I told the CEO, like, we have to do this for important technical reasons, he would.
So if you were to say, for example, we've just become aware of a security issue in the way we've been doing things and everything has to be torn down and done this new way, that's kind of your call to make because you're the person who should know that.
Yep. And it's really great having that support. I think a lot of people in coding careers get frustrated because you have like management people who don't understand like the technical ins and outs, making decisions. Like actually one of my employees was talking about a previous job where on Sunday he had to, on his day off, he had to go like log into some server and run these special jobs. This is absolutely something that if he'd spent 4 hours, he could automate it and just have the computer do it, but they would never assign him the time to do it. And he just burned out. So it's really nice to be able to like, okay, I know we want to work on this super new shiny feature, but we need to get our house in order.
Sure. That's really cool.
And you didn't know these, you just met them at this meetup? You didn't have any connection to
I met them about a year ago. Yeah.
And was it like just a tech meetup? Like what was the...
Yeah, it was the local PHP meetup.
Huh.
So a small group is probably like 12 people in the room.
Were there any like high school kids, were they kind of showing up to...
There were not.
Would they have been out of place if they were there, you think? Or they kind of
they would have been
hang out, or would be...
They would have been super welcome.
Interesting.
Huh. So if you're listening,
go to your local PHP meetup. So is that, if a kid showed up who was relatively new to that world and they had questions, would that be kind of annoying, or is that the purpose of it? Like, what are you just hanging out and what's I guess?
The purpose generally at these meetups is to learn. So someone's presenting on a topic.
So there's a presentation generally? Okay.
There's generally a presentation. It's not just hanging out. There's a presentation, then there's socializing.
Format. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, loosely structured.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if they ask questions, that'd be super good.
That's awesome.
Like I participated in some like coding camps, like helping out with that, where like it's, learn HTML and JavaScript and CSS for like 10 to 12-year-olds. And that's been super rewarding to do that and work with kids like that.
What about coding boot camps for adults who want to change careers, or for younger people who don't want to go to college but do want to have a career in coding? And do you hire out of those kinds of things? Do you hire people who've gone through those? I guess I should ask.
I haven't, but it's not out of.
It's not because you wouldn't.
I don't.
Had the chance yet.
Yeah, not a lot of them apply for the jobs that.
And would it be the same kind of thing? Like if they went to, say, a 3-month boot camp, I don't even know if that's how long they are, but for the sake of argument, it's not so much that you care how many months it was, you care what they can do on GitHub, how they can discuss a problem and think through it.
Where do they stand now as a result?
As you would evaluate anybody else, basically, it sounds like, right?
Right. Yeah, like one of my employees, like if you look on paper for like how long he's been doing it, it's like short experience, but in that amount of time has like developed amazing proficiency. So like I wouldn't look and say like, oh, you just started coding, 2 years ago. It would make me like, I would definitely they'd have to prove it.
Sure.
Like,
Yeah.
But yeah, you can do an accelerated learning if you really just marinate yourself in it and work hard at it.
Is there, you mentioned, the relative unimportance of a 4-year degree in this context. Are there any sort of certifications on certain, like maybe a 6-month program where we're hearing a lot in the education world about, getting certified with like Excel and
or like
that kind of
degrees,
thing. Are there other sort of, shorter programs that would have any relevance to the people you would hire?
Depending on what the position is for. So like if I'm looking for someone who's going to do like sysadmin stuff, so that's system administration, running the servers, or DevOps, developer operations, which is kind of, they're a little bit of developer and a little bit of sysadmin. I would look for if they had an Amazon certification.
AWS. For AWS.
Amazon Web Services, yeah. That's huge. It's kind of ubiquitous in the industry, and it is it's a very powerful but very confusing and arcane thing. So if you can prove like I have the certification that shows I know all this weird stuff, then that makes them very valuable, because that's not a thing you can teach someone in like 3 months.
Right. Are there different versions of that? Or there's just one thing called the Amazon certification you're describing?
There's a few, but like the main they like you look at their menu and I call it like the Cheesecake Factory of servers. It's just like 33 pages of overlapping weird services. But
I've only gone on to like the AWS interface a few times, just like going to the main thing, and it's like thousands of just little niche.
It's rough.
Everything from like language processing to like just anything.
Everything. But the big ones are EC2 is their like virtual servers. S3 is their like simple storage solution. Or I forget what the 3 S's are. Those are the big ones. And then there's
like unsecured S3 buckets are where they're always finding like all the credit card data for like Delta. I mean, not Delta, I don't want to put them, but like some huge company will just leave all their credit card information.
Right.
Yes.
Who knew that was going to be an issue?
AWS is just like, it's like back in the 60s, they would sell a house in a kit. Literally a residential house. Sears would sell a house in a kit. And Amazon Web Services is a lot like a house in a kit. It's like, hey, you can build a house, but it might not be the sturdiest. You don't know what you're doing.
So that's a certification that if someone had
that one will definitely stand out to me.
For something.
A lot of the other ones, I could care less.
Do you ever have an employee where you say like, okay, now you go get the certification?
Yeah, would you ever on your team already pay for someone to go get a certification? Like,
if it was related to their job, sure. Yeah. A big supporter of like continuing education. So like a lot of times it'd be like, what are you doing today? I am going to spend the entire day researching this. Like, good, because I'll
that's
help
a
us.
valid
Yeah, that's going to come.
That is work.
Yeah.
right.
And that'll help us get a better answer.
Somebody on the team too.
I'd rather them spend that day and give me a better answer the next day than to just.
Have you ever had to let somebody go because they abused that kind of trust?
Maybe not so much for like to spend all their time learning and not doing.
Yeah, well, or they say I'm going to do this, but they're actually playing Fortnite.
Not so much that, but just inability to like meet deadlines and meet expectations.
So, just trying to think of the timeline of what we've established here. So, for the 13 years, were there companies you worked with for that entire span, or did it tend to be you interact with somebody for a year or two and then you kind of move on from them? Or
yeah, it's some super long term clients, and then other ones who would be like 2 to 6 year kind of overlapping spans.
And then since you've stepped away from that, were you breaking a lot of hearts? Are people upset to hear that you?
No, so I generally handled that through attrition by just not replacing the contracts that expired or
Yeah.
Just kind of let it phase itself out.
kind of let it down to a low simmer.
Do you have specific aspirations in the near short term or longer? Is there any kind of a business that you've thought of that you want to start or anything?
Yes, so I want to get into products.
Products meaning like physical products or products like software products?
Like software products. Yeah. So
Can
instead
you
of
tell us what they might be about without obviously giving away the idea of the thing.
So I guess one of the more interesting ones that I've been thinking about and working on sort of in the background, but I need to resuscitate, is one around the idea of like configuration changes on a WordPress site. So, there's the WordPress software, and then there's something called plugins, which is like a way to add features to it, like additional software. And, sometimes WordPress sites are running 60 of these plugins of varying size and complexity.
Made by different people.
Made by different people. So there's all these
maybe they don't interact well together. Depending.
Yeah, there's all that. And then, there's the software that they have to add, but then there's also like sometimes a lot of configuration. So a lot of times people will have like a test site where they install something and then configure it and like, maybe it like breaks. It breaks or looks ugly, or like you have to add in your custom logo or whatever it is. And once they get it all configured, they're like, okay, that's good. Now I want to put this on my site. So they go add the plugin on their site, and then they have to go through all those steps again.
Yeah.
So there's all these kind of like configuration steps.
There many times.
Right.
Yeah.
So the thing I'm working on is essentially you can just hit record and
track down every little.
It'll be like, here's your steps. You install this plugin. You set this option to this.
Yeah.
And then make that replayable on the site, so you can push up the code and also all those steps that you did.
I think we may want to edit that out. I feel like that's
too good of an idea.
I feel like somebody could be like, oh, that is a good idea. Well, I could do it.
Yeah.
I feel like somebody
there's been other attempts at it, and I found them severely limited and lacking in other ways.
Sure.
So do you think you could ever see yourself, would that be a side project, or is that one of several things where your focus is coming up with?
I think that would be a side project that I would like to become a medium project. And then maybe in the future, a large project.
Would you sell that through the WordPress, like the normal WordPress platform that other people do plugins through? Or would you have how would you get that out?
Yeah. So you can't directly sell through like the WordPress like plugin directory, but you can have you do like the freemium model.
Mm-hmm. Like a free version, and then
the free version, and maybe there's like a services subscription if there's some service component, or maybe there's a pro version that does. So you give them like the basic version and it needs to do something like reasonably useful, but then all the the extra features are the pro version. There are many different models, and I've debated a lot on which ones to. Yeah.
Is there anything that we haven't touched on that you can think that we kind of should have asked about, perhaps, that we have not? We're usually pretty thorough.
Yeah. Is there anything also that you would like to say to an audience that may consist only of our close relatives?
Or may have some high schoolers.
No telling exactly who would be listening to you, but is there anything that you want to say to them?
Tell your children and grandchildren to learn to code.
Yeah.
Like honestly, even if this is not going to be your career, I think more and more you know, we were talking earlier before the show about like how doctors are spending all their times on computers and tablets.
Yeah. That's a part of your
Actually,
life.
like one of the big contributors to WordPress is himself a doctor, like a medical doctor.
Really?
Yeah.
Didn't know that.
So but more and more, like whatever job you have, it's going to interact with computers. Like you could be literally a construction worker, but then you're going through like your safety
You're using a
checklist,
tablet
or you're
for
using
sure.
a tablet.
Yeah.
And like, I think more and more, just like little ways you can automate your life. And like, you might not think like, well, that's not coding. That's just like using it, but it's kind of the same mindset of like directing computers
Talking
to
to a
do the
machine,
things you want them to do. Yeah.
Yeah.
So would it be, let's say if there's a listener who is, you know, already heading off to college next year, or maybe first or second year of college, would it be good advice maybe that person should kind of study whatever they're maybe interested in anyway, and then also plan to kind of find some interest in a certain language or a certain tool or a certain website and just kind of follow that and explore the code behind it? You know, if you think a CS degree, as you said, in most situations is not what you'd be looking for in your world, if you're kind of thinking, well, I'm going to go to college, I'm going to get my degree, is it in the meantime could be kind of a side project hobby kind of thing?
Absolutely. Yeah, it doesn't need to be.
Get yourself started.
Yeah, you could give it as much time as you want.
And as you said before, a good first get your foot in the door is to just help out with the very documentation that you yourself.
Yeah, just you're literally like some of the best things. Like I will like even as someone with like experience, I'll read someone who wrote a blog post like, I'm going to learn this thing in like, 3 hours. And like, here's my from zero.
Mm-hmm.
Like sometimes they'll do like a YouTube video, like a screencast live where they're like, wow, I am so confused right now. And it's fascinating to watch through. People, yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'll like, they'll come up with like a weird, like a solution that is like a kind of an outside the box solution. I'm like, wow, whoa, maybe that's how it should work.
Like outside of coding kind of. Yeah. This is another one of those questions that could be real dumb. I believe like Audacity is an open source audio editor, right? And like I think
sounds right.
Okay, I don't know if this is are these? I'm trying to think of other projects of the type that are.
Oh, what are some exampple of open source things? Is that?
Yeah, are these like I think GNU is a version of I think it's what it's called it's like a free Photoshop kind of. Mess around with
GIMP is what you're thinking.
GIMP, yeah. There's a
Is the new image manipulation?
There we go. Yeah.
I think Blender is 3D.
Blender. I think is something. So our
stuff.
If you had this connection early on with the blogosphere and that world. For people who aren't into that, it seems like there would be other open source projects for other types of software. Like are these the kind of things where you would also find documentation for them? And
sure, like if you're into like a more like tangible thing, like the Raspberry Pi community is really vibrant.
Which again, for the audience, that's not like the food. Raspberry Pi is delicious, but that's not what we're
Raspberry,
talking about.
Pi.
Super simple, tiny computer.
Yeah, it's a computer that is like it fits in the palm of your hand.
A deck of cards, even smaller, I think. Yeah.
If you watch Mr. Robot, doesn't he use one to like?
Probably, I haven't seen much. I haven't seen enough of it.
He does something like that.
I've seen super cool projects.
Anyway, and it's very
like watering their plants on certain timers or syncing up different things.
Yeah, and there's another one that. Arduino is another. It's kind of it's less powerful, but more, but cheaper and
approachable.
Maybe. More approachable.
Yeah,
and so you can get into that space. That'd be really cool. Yeah, the thing is, I'm struggling to think of to nail down anything because like there's so much open source stuff out
like
there.
if somebody said name your 10 favorite songs, you're like, I like a lot of songs. Like, how do I even
So maybe kind of find a niche somewhere in there that is actually interesting to you, and then just follow that.
Say whatever your interest is, there's some like
connection.
You could be into music, and there's going to be some interesting open source music thing.
Yeah. Fruity Loops was one of those. When I was in the music like you could.
Oh
yeah, I was just sorry. Another open source software for Fruity Loops. When I was in college, I remember a friend of mine showed it to me, and it was very cool. Anyway,
actually, before I got into WordPress, one of my first experiences in open source was with what at the time was called the Xbox Media Player.
Okay.
So this was software that ran on hacked versions of the original Microsoft Xbox, which came out in 2001. So this was software. So like at the time, like you could play games on that, but that was pretty much all it could do. But people are like, okay, we have this like computer
Pretty
essentially
powerful
Yeah.
thing.
hooked up to your entertainment system.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
what can
Why
we
don't
do with that?
something else with it?
So
Yeah.
there was software that allowed you to like have a movie and music library and control it all.
Wow.
And that software, so I got involved with that community. And I mean, that software was later rebranded as Xbox Media Center. And now you know it as Plex.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it became a thing, like a real,
Yeah.
that's really cool.
Yeah.
Wow. I remember some version of the Wii, either the first one or the second one, there were people on YouTube who had done some kind of thing to like modify the controllers and basically turn the controllers into these like not just laser pointers, but you could like draw in like 3D space with it.
Oh
Something that
man,
wasn't-
I've
right,
seen
right.
some things on Reddit of people doing 3D VR painting, where they like end up. You can only see it if you're like watching.
Yeah.
And they end up like standing in the middle of a painting. It's like their whole world. You know, it's like showing a whatever mind blowing.
Yeah.
Anyway,
But so basically just get something that you like and play around with it and like
Yeah.
just get into it somehow. Is that kind of the
Absolutely.
general catch-all advice there?
have you heard of there's a subreddit called It Runs Doom? Have you heard of that?
No.
People take any device with a screen and try to get it to run,
run
Doom,
Doom.
based on the like this is like this computer game from
So it could be like a TI-85
the early 90s or
Right.
or it could
Oh,
be-
but like Tamagotchis and stuff. I mean, things you would never ever imagine, and it runs Doom. Like it sounds like a kind of interesting, pointless challenge, but to try to learn whatever the context is.
People like
the environment.
puzzles.
Yeah.
I feel like we have
Sucked out all of your
Many-
knowledge, everything.
Can I ask you one question? Actually, could I just
really?
just my last thing. Yeah. What has been the biggest, just like flat out mistake or anything like that you've ever personally been responsible for? Have you ever crashed something that was really critical for a client? Have you ever said that a particular thing ran a certain way and then it turns out you were wrong?
It runs Doom. It doesn't run Doom.
I mean, I've definitely had an oops moment where I reversed two things I was typing and wiped out a bunch of data on a live database without a backup for a friend.
A friend at the time. Yeah.
It became tenuous after that. And that was rough. Like the worst part was just like, because there's this moment where it happens and you're like almost in denial and like, the computer made a mistake.
The right.
It's not just completely following the instructions that I typed in. Like,
Exactly. Yeah.
And I had to own up to it. And
Oof.
like, I did my best to recover. I got I literally wrote a bot to scrape Google to pull old content back in.
Wow.
It was rough. That was a bad feeling.
Thanks for reminding me.
I also was managing a WordPress core software release, and it was a really ambitious release. So we had a lot of features scheduled, and like a bunch of my friends, in the community got really involved. And
Sorry, can I interrupt?
Yeah.
Ask you to clarify again for the audience. Like WordPress core is like the
WordPress itself.
It's like the most important. It's the engine, so to speak. Like, right? I mean,
Yes.
There's no room for error, really. Like,
It runs something
Millions
like
of
a
websites.
third of the web, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So
okay. So just to put it in context, this wasn't
Yes.
just like,
yes,
okay,
Yeah.
this was a big deal. I mean,
was
they're all
big.
big deals, but this was like a really, really
this was a big deal.
Yeah.
And plus I had like a bunch of my friends who had like volunteered all this time into it, and a bunch of the features turned out really well, but there were a few that people had put a lot of time into, and just at the end it kept becoming clear that like
This just wasn't
we have to go back
wasn't gonna
to
come
this
together.
was fraught from the beginning, and we thought we could just muscle it into the shape that we wanted, but like it's just not going to be good enough, and like we had to dump all that code.
Wow.
That was really rough.
Did that stuff ever make it into a later version, or it was just abandoned?
It mostly was abandoned, and like now looking back, I'm glad it was abandoned. It was a hard decision to
Yeah.
make.
The right choice to make.
But yeah, I think so. Like mistake would be just like not spending enough time with it in the idea phase, and getting
Because it
too
might have
far
saved
down.
all that effort and all that frustration.
Yeah, and this is a hard thing because like sometimes you can just stay in the idea phase forever, but we could have done stuff like small mock-ups.
Yeah.
Yeah, like sometimes you just get stuck planning and planning and
Yeah.
planning, but we got stuck like just doing and doing and doing and not stopping to evaluate. Like, is this the right direction?
Yeah.
Until we are at a place we did not want to be.
And the only option then was just to say,
Kill it. Yeah.
we wasted all that time.
Did that change your approach for later iterations of this same kind of thing? Did you
Yeah,
do
it
mock-ups, or-
it definitely made me more cautious about like ambition, about trying to
getting
do
all
too
these people
much.
on board with something that
Did that cost you like your standing in the community a little bit, or?
I wouldn't say so, because like I owned up to it. Like,
Sure.
We had a conference in London, and I went to a talk there that was like lessons learned
From that. Yeah.
Yeah.
that Mike's question made me think of a similar question. Is there anything when you look back on, the path that got you where you are currently, is there something you would do differently going back? I mean, I guess maybe an easy answer would be that college didn't pan out and that, I don't know, or
Well,
what do you
I
think?
wouldn't. I would say mostly I don't see the college as a waste of time. Like, again, it was the classes that weren't, I guess not a lot was related to what I do now. There was a little bit of like basic computer stuff and I guess some of the math and business stuff, but it was like philosophy and, literature were like the stuff that has kind of stuck with me that makes me not regret the experience on the whole. I mean, I guess I would have, tried to get involved with like a Facebook like company or one of those big tech upstarts earlier.
Sure, you could know that. Yeah.
Sure.
Are you ever like on the hunt for like, given whatever, you have in that world of,
If somebody walked up and were like, hey, I have the next big, I don't know, Bitcoin or Facebook or whatever, like, would you get on that now? Or
I would consider it. I also just want to like, plan a few ideas of my own as seeds and see if I can. I just need, you just need one to hit to retire on.
Yeah.
Related to mistakes.
Oh yeah. Was there any, you mentioned Swift. Would you maybe have, in retrospect, focused on another language at any point, or?
Yes, I think I would have gotten into,
Swift specifically, or?
Well, yeah, Swift is like a newer, there's like, they have two overlapping languages, Objective-C and Swift, and Swift is like the newer one. But yeah, back in the day, I think
You might have jumped onto that.
I would have done well to get into that.
Was that on your radar at all at that point?
It was on my radar, but I was pretty far down the web application path.
All right.
I'm talked out. Are you guys?
Well, I mean, you never really talked out, but for the moment. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah. Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah. And
talking to us.
Sure. If we ever get anyone to listen to this, like what you said will be very useful for whoever might have been thinking of a technical career or any of those kinds of things.
Cheers.
Once again, we would like to thank Mark for his time very sincerely. That was very interesting, and we covered a lot of really important topics, I think. One thing that jumps out at me first is he mentioned, just, coincidentally, we were able to sit down with him at a time when he happened to be in the middle of a change after 13 years of relatively, from what we understand, relatively
consistent,
like the same routine or the same norm for him. And he cited the idea that it was volatile before, like to do web development, I guess on like a contract basis here and there, instead of having one employer who is the same person paying you every 2 weeks or every month or whatever for 13 years. Instead, it's someone hires you for something and that might take a week or a month or 6 months or whatever, or maybe it's 18 months of work with one person while you also are doing a couple other jobs with other people.
Sure. And this, for the audience, you could sort of refer to that kind of work as like project work, gig work, and those are kind of like long to be gigs, but that's that kind of work as opposed to salaried work or works, with work arrangements with longer contracts than that.
Yeah. So that was his reality for 13 years. And you have a family, you have kids, you have a place where you all live. Certainly a house.
Those are often called houses.
Very often referred to as houses. You can see where stability and predictability would be nice. And very often there is, those can be, not always, but can be kind of opposite ends of the spectrum, where on one side you have maybe more flexibility, more possibilities as far as making more money, but it's not so stable. And then on the other end, you have something that might be a lot more stable, but not as much income, but you can count on it more. That's not always the case, but in a lot of careers, you kind of decide to go more toward one end of that spectrum or the other, according to what you're comfortable with and what makes sense.
Yeah. And a related idea for that you may often see mentioned in popular culture, TV, movies, whatever, is the notion of job security. It's basically what you're talking about, right? So when you have job security, for a lot of people, most people, that's a valuable thing in itself. So you might choose to take a particular position with less overall monetary compensation if you legitimately believe that you'll be secure in that job and then you don't have to worry. Of course, not everybody opts for that, but that is a common phrase, job security.
Yeah. And, you might have an offer from a company that looks really great, but they've only been around for a year and a half. And you might think, ooh, like they could be gone in a year or two, there's no guarantee.
Legitimate thing.
Or they might be around for a long time and a company that's already been around for a long time could also tank. You don't know for sure, but it's certainly one of these things that's less tangible that, a lot of times when you're trying to look into careers, you think, oh, like what's the average salary? And obviously that's an interesting statistic to look at, but there's all these other possible complicating factors to consider as well. And the other thing you mentioned around the same time, or when he was explaining about his rationale for making that change, he also mentioned that he was in a position where he's kind of always having to look for that next client, and he's got to be a salesman basically in addition to everything else. And this is a common theme with people who sort of work for themselves, is you kind of have to wear a lot of hats, as they say, and be not just the person who does the core skill that you're actually good at, interested in, whatever. You also have to sell yourself, and not everybody is comfortable or happy being a salesperson. And it can certainly be frustrating to think, I wish I could just do the thing I'm good at and not have to be kind of shopping myself around and pitching myself to the next person. It would be good to just pitch myself to somebody once, and have that person be my employer for a long time. And as we said, he had just kind of decided to make that switch. And he told us he became the CTO, Chief Technical Officer, of a local company. And it was interesting because it didn't seem like he was looking for that job with that company. He just had a general sense of kind of want to get out there, talk to people who are in this world of, tech stuff and coding and software and everything. And he, through a series of few related things, ended up, connecting with these people.
Yeah. And that is a big thing. The challenge that you just mentioned, from what I've seen, is sort of a big thing in tech specifically. A lot of people who are, and I'm going to make a gross generalization here. So, I know that before I do it. Like a lot of times I do it and I'm not realizing it. Now I'm doing it and realizing. So generally speaking, it's a not uncommon thing that a person who is strongly inclined towards technology, specifically like the software coding kinds of technology, as opposed to, maybe other kinds of things where you have more direct contact with like the real world with physical processes. When you're working in software, it's not at all uncommon that people who do that a lot, they either start out being sort of more introverted, or over time, just because they spend so much time doing this and communicating via chat boards and stuff like that, rather than, face-to-face discussions that you might have in other positions, they sort of become introverted, even if they didn't necessarily start out that way. And a lot of times, I should add that the phrase introverted is sort of used as like not a dirty word, but it's a thing. People are like, oh, I wish I was less introverted. I wish I was more extroverted. You hear that a lot. And I don't think that needs to be how anybody, feels about that. It's not a judgment thing to be one or the other. People can often be both, in fact, depending on the circumstances. But it is just a general true statement that a lot of people in tech are either drawn to it partly because they like to kind of work on their own and do stuff and get really like deep into a problem and think about it. Or, just over time, you sort of stop going out and talking to people because you're working on things, on your computer. So very interesting to me that he recognized, hey, I should like get out there and go talk to people, and just to go do it proactively on his own. And that is what leads to, a lot of times, leads to sorts of new deals, new projects, new contracts, possibly new positions. And one thing that I think a lot of people, especially when they're starting out in their careers, have is a fear of doing that, even if they consider themselves extroverted, to go be somewhere and specifically talk about your job or your business or your skills or whatever, is off-putting for a lot of people. And it really doesn't need to be. In those scenarios, I kind of think of it like speed dating, which I've never actually done, but I've seen it on TV and I assume I know roughly how it works. It's kind of right there in the name, speed dating.
Yeah.
But when you are speed dating, everyone is there to speed date. Like that's the purpose of it. So it's silly to go speed date and then not speed date while you're speed dating, like you should do it. In a similar kind of a way, when you go to these meetups or conferences or whatever, everybody is there to learn their craft, to get better at it, meet people, talk about it. Like that's what it's for. So there's no need to feel, that you can't go contribute to that. Of course you can. That's why it exists.
Yeah, you are in this position of wanting a job or wanting to connect with people, and especially if you're not familiar with that feeling, if it's new for you, it's a new position for you to be in, it can feel like nobody wants to hear about this. But everybody's in that situation at one time or another, and everybody in the working world understands it or has felt it or will feel it, and it's a valid thing, and nobody's gonna be like, oh, like, wow, can you believe that this person came up and started talking about it?
Yeah, like,
it's not gonna happen that way. And even if it does, even if it's like worst case realistic scenario and that does happen, say, oh, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. I guess that's not what you're, I'll go talk to that person.
Or just totally forget about it. When you mentioned that, it reminded me.
Yeah.
More than once in my life, I've been at a conference or something and I start trying to talk to somebody and there's just sort of this like mutual, neither one of us wants to be doing this. Yeah. And you can kind of tell with the body language, like both bodies sort of start angling away from each other, like signaling on a primal level.
Yeah.
Someone else please come talk to us.
Move along.
So that does happen. It's fine. Like, move on to the next thing. Nobody, doesn't need to be a lifelong scarring event.
Absolutely. And I wanted to mention too, and you basically covered this, but in this case, Mark said that he had that sense of, I should maybe do this less. I should be on my own in this room less. I'd like to go out and talk to some people. Everybody doesn't have to draw that conclusion. It's not like that's the right way to feel, as Mike said, with being introverted versus being extroverted. But Mark, as an individual, just made that judgment of I would like to, maybe not every moment of every day, but, from time to time, kind of get out, meet some people I don't already know who are in this world and sort of see what's going on.
And this kind of dovetails a little bit, this idea of like introversion/extroversion and how it doesn't have to be like the deciding factor in whether you interact with other people or how you interact with other people. Fits very well actually with what Mark was describing about this sort of online community springing up around WordPress around the time that he was getting interested in technology. And a couple of things stuck out there for me. One of them is that wasn't actually that long ago, like on a timeline of human history. It was 10, 15, 20 years ago. It feels like several lifetimes ago for me personally. If you're listening to this, there's a good chance you weren't even really like mentally online when any of that was going on, or possibly even alive when he was, doing those things. But at the time that he did it, it was a breakthrough technology. It was something people thought would change the world. And arguably, I would say it did.
Oh, no question.
Massively change a lot of things. You could argue that sites and services like Instagram or whatever, like they had not their actual technological births in like the blogging thing, but their ideological, like the idea that anyone could post anything and this would be something that you could share and comment on or whatever. That was pretty groundbreaking. It was a big deal. Yeah. The thing is, though, if you're listening to this and you're thinking that you might like to go into technology, as we discussed in the talk with Mark, obviously, you're not going to go on now. Well, you might actually go on now and try to make a name for yourself in the WordPress community. Absolutely. That's still a thing you can do. WordPress is thriving. It's probably not going to go anywhere anytime soon. You could make a name for yourself in that. But the point is not WordPress specifically. The point is this is how a technology often goes from not existing to competing with other ones to kind of becoming the dominant one. It's that communities get together, often spontaneously, often without any compensation, at least in the beginning for the individuals. And they contribute in that kind of way. So they contribute over forum discussions, over chat, Slack channels, whatever it might be. That's a perfectly valid way to work with people if you don't like going to, meet up somewhere and having a drink with them or whatever it might be. Or of course you can do both. You can do anything. But it's worth noting that this idea of getting out and interacting, even if it's done electronically, that's still a core skill for working as part of a team and helping to build something that actually goes on to sort of have a life on its own. You're pretty much always going to have to interact with somebody in some kind of way to get that kind of thing to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. It is interesting to try to have that perspective when you look at something like blogging, which feels like a very old idea now. As you said, it feels like that was a lifetime ago and that was like a new concept. And at the time for him, it was fairly brand new. And, the analogous thing today would be something I might not even know about yet because
I'm going to guess we both don't know it. I would love to tell you what the thing is that you should go do, but
whatever it is today that is like that, again, we probably don't even know what it is, or we might find out about it in a year or two, or who knows. But the point is that at the time for Mark, this was an emerging software, not for Mark, for the world. And it's probably, and we're not experts in this, but it's probably a pretty solid indicator that an idea like this will stick around when there is that community that just right away kind of is drawn to that, and these people start talking about it, start using it. You can't really fake that. I mean, you could kind of do in the beginning, try to whatever, but you can't really sustain like a fake,
Right.
fervent community
of
people who are all trying to use it and figure it out and everything like that.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that when you kind of see that happening somewhere and you feel like, I wouldn't recommend just looking for something with the community and like trying to make yourself be a part of that community. But in this case, Mark, clearly he said, he started a blog. He felt strongly about, these discussions he was a part of. And he said, this is interesting. And I don't know if I knew this, if I'm old enough
You probably
to
didn't
have noted or whatever.
I guess you didn't know it. Whatever.
Yeah, that he said it was at an era when you didn't just go over and like comment on someone else's blog or reply to someone. Like they wrote a post, like a whole involved post, and then you on your own blog wrote a whole involved post in response to that. And this much more like long form conversation, which is definitely distinct from what has become more the norm more recently. And, it was clear from the very beginning, as he said, this was an important thing to him, and it had nothing to do with money at the time. And he was, it distracted from his education. Like it was so important that it became a major part of his life pretty immediately. And he, that passion was just there from the beginning, it seems.
Yeah. And when you mentioned the distraction from education, which seems like something we wouldn't, super be advocating, you know what I'm trying to say. But our goal with this podcast, as we've said repeatedly, is to present the truth, like what people actually go through as they find their ways in their careers. And I wanted to mention that this distraction from education is something we've also seen with at least one other guest, our restaurant owner guest, Eric. I remembered his name. I was just describing for the audience who he was, because if I were them, I wouldn't remember. Anyway, so not that he isn't memorable, but I wouldn't remember his name.
I gotcha.
Yeah. So anyway, it was the same kind of a thing with him. He was going to college, making a very good faith effort to do well in school.
At first.
Yeah. But feeling like it was important, feeling guilt for not being able to do it in the way that he wanted to do it.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, both he and Mark described that like when they weren't in these classes that were becoming increasingly less interesting or decreasingly interesting for them, they were off actually doing the thing that they wanted to be doing, the thing that eventually became their careers and gave them professions and skill sets that they're happy with and proud of. And I'm not suggesting in any kind of way that every single person listening to this should just scrap formal education and go out and do the thing that they actually want to do. But in a lot of cases, you can kind of blend them. So if you are finding, hey, I really enjoy, I don't even know, whatever the thing might be, whenever I have my free time, there's probably an academic pursuit around that. There's probably some kind of course that you could take or certification you could consider or something. So I'm not saying, college doesn't apply to anything and formal education doesn't apply to anything and go out and actually do something else. You can do both or, pick one or whatever. But very interesting to me that both of these people, while they're trying to figure out like how to do the sort of standard path formal thing, they're just in their own time creating a skill set that they, that the world finds value in.
Yeah, like they literally can't even stop themselves from doing it because it's such
this is what they like.
Such a natural fit for them. And he mentioned he wrote code from the very beginning. He indicated that he used something called Movable Type at first. They went to a paid model, and then everybody left and went to WordPress, which was free. And to migrate the site, he had to write some code to make that happen. He indicated that he had some HTML background from earlier in life. He read a single, I think, like HTML for Dummies type book. So he had the general concept of coding, in his mind, the idea that you're giving instructions to a computer and you have to have, certain structures and everything
in a code.
In a code, you might say. And so he kind of, built on that foundation significantly, just driven by not the idea of I want to finish this coding project so I get a grade, or I want to develop these skills so that I can make money on them one day, but just I have a blog that I care about. It's over here. I want it over there, or it has this characteristic and I want it to have this better characteristic. It's just that personal internal drive to do it. And clearly it led to gaining a bunch of skills in that area.
One other huge thing for me that I already was aware of, I'm sure you were probably already aware of it too, and portions of our audience are probably also aware of it, but I think most people are not aware of it, which is that in technological fields, generally speaking, the person who might hire you or want to work with you cares much more about skills you can demonstrate and a body of work that you can show that you've created and comment on intelligently and that kind of like actual practical real world, this is what I'm capable of sort of demonstration generally speaking, hiring managers and companies care much more about that kind of practical thing than they care about whether you have a particular degree or honestly any kind of degree. And I'm not basing this solely on what Mark just said, although Mark did make this very clear. But it's also something that you see mentioned over and over again on job boards, online forums. I know several people who are hiring managers very high up in technology, in very significant large companies. And they've all said the same thing. Like, I don't really care that you have a 4-year degree in something or a 2-year degree or whatever. What I care is when I ask you to solve this problem, can you solve it in a way that makes sense to me and I understand that you actually know what you're talking about? So again, not in any way suggesting that you should definitely not go to college if you want to do technological stuff. But what I am saying is if you want to do technological things, I would recommend that you find ways to do them practically, whether it's projects you design on your own or coding challenges you find online. Like, do stuff so that when you do try to get hired or work with somebody, you can say, here's my GitHub account, like here's the things that I've done, and you start the conversation that way.
Another way that has value also is that gives you some practical experience of doing this thing that you think you really want to do, and you might go and do it and I don't really like this.
Yeah.
or is this challenging for me? There's something else that feels like a more natural fit or whatever. It's cool to be able to have that opportunity like you can right now. Try to exercise these skills and get better at them, and either find, oh, this is seems like a good fit for me, or maybe it doesn't.
I was going to say, I know more than one person who has been very in love with the idea of being a software developer, and then which is fine. That's how you learn stuff. But a couple of projects into like a coding boot camp or something they found online, they're like, oh no, this is very much not what I thought. And
it's totally fine,
of course.
But it's certainly advantageous for you if you can learn that earlier rather than later.
Yeah,
and there's no problem with that. Certainly, as we're both repeatedly saying, it's not like you have to be.
I'd like to say it again.
Okay, program, because it's totally understandable that students, especially in middle school and high school, would feel like on some level, like you have to like making software, like anybody who is, I don't know, respectable or intelligent or modern or something has to have an interest in this, and you don't. I mean, you're probably not going to be able to avoid a life with some kind of software in it, but you don't have to make that software. That's not a comfortable
if you're listening to this
thing
right now,
for you.
You're using software.
You are,
right?
indeed.
So software is kind of here to stay.
But, or you're in the room with us and we can't see you.
Well.
So absolutely not a problem if you're not into this sort of thing, but it is very cool that this is, there's certain professions where it's a much more challenging thing to get like a practical hands-on experience doing it, but coding is something where you can do it.
I would also add conversely or possibly inversely. I never formally mastered the difference between the converse and the inverse of something, but the flip side of that is there are also people who do start out trying to code something and they find that it's pretty challenging, harder than they thought it would be. And then they stick with it and they realize, when you're coding, not that I've done a ton of it, but it's a bit like learning a language in the first, there's a steep learning curve in the first few days, weeks, whatever. You don't even know what the context is of the thing that you're trying to figure out. So there's like no foothold for you.
Yeah.
But you stick around with it, you keep working on it, and eventually parts of it start to make sense. And then you can kind of stand back from it eventually and be like, oh, like this is, as Mark understands, like all the different moving pieces of WordPress and how something that's done in one part is going to affect something else, or how things are changed, or all of that kind of stuff. You start to understand it on that level. So don't feel bad if you don't get that right away. Nobody gets that right away.
Yeah.
You can eventually get to it. So
so if you have some resistance in the beginning, we don't want to suggest that you should just call it quits right away or anything like that.
Another couple of things I would like to point out just briefly. One of them is the way that Mark and other companies around WordPress specifically have found a way to monetize something that is essentially free. And monetize is kind of like a funny sounding word, maybe if you're not familiar with hearing it. It basically just means make money on something. Back before WordPress in particular, but before sort of the current era of technology, it was much less common that you would make something that you would make money, have a business that gave away a free thing sort of like as its basic function.
Yeah.
That was sort of a groundbreaking idea at the time. And now it's pretty common, right? Mm-hmm. To the point, there's a phrase, and this is useful for you to know if you're listening to this and you are a young person or the parent or caretaker of something of a young person. There's a saying in technology, if you're not paying for the product, then you are the product, which is also true and worth noting. But, so things like Facebook, Instagram, et cetera, these are all free models that, again, there's ways to like monetize via ads or via like consultation services you can sell around using the thing effectively or whatever it is. So just wanted to keep that in mind as you're sort of looking around, maybe thinking of jobs to go into or areas of technology, business, whatever. It doesn't have to be the case that giving something away for free is bad. It's very, very often a way to build up a good user base and following and everything else. One other thing I wanted to add, we went through in this discussion some common but not super jargony technical terms that I think are worth noting because I'm noticing that they come more and more into just everyday conversation. These are the differences between things like low level and high level. It used to be like when I was growing up, before everyone used computers all the time for everything, a low level explanation was like not badly done, but kind of like something you'd say
simplistic
to a kid, right?
Yeah.
And the high level one is like and now it's almost the inverse.
In the context of
technology, a high level discussion or an explanation is just sort of like ignoring all the details, kind of here's the gist of it. And a low level one is like, here's the actual nuts and bolts of how this specific thing works. And a lot of times you'll see in a job description or just a casual conversation, somebody will say, yeah, they're a low level programmer, or that's a very low level thing. And for me, at least when I first started hearing that, I was like, it's kind of an insult. Like, why would you say that? The guy's standing right there. Yeah. But what it means is, this person, this low-level programmer, is actually very well versed in these specific, like technical nuts and bolts of a particular problem or technology or type of processor or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I do. I know we probably each have a couple more things we want to say before this goes on for too long. I'll throw a few out there. He did mention, which I thought was interesting, that in the beginning, first of all, this is sort of a new dynamic, relatively new and now common, whatever it must be 20 years later, that, it's very normal now because of the pace of change in technology that someone is hired to do something that is kind of a new type of task. Nobody's really sure exactly how it should be done. But at the time, it wasn't so common, that you would hire somebody and that person that you're hiring would say, I've never actually done that, but I've done similar things and nobody else has really actually done that,
Yeah.
But I can say with some confidence, I don't think that should be too much of a problem. That 100 years ago, you didn't often hire someone who would just say, I can't do that, or I have done that. Yeah, but I feel good that I could do that, and that's becoming more normal. Another thing was, it was interesting because he described being in business school and then he's sort of suddenly making money on the side. I think he described that people even came to him, just said, hey, can I give you some money to do this thing? I don't think he even put that.
Well, more than that, he even mentioned that a frequent client started paying him more money because they didn't want him to leave. Like that's how critical a skill set can be to a business if they realize how valuable you are. It's sort of like whoever was a patron for Michelangelo at any particular time, like there's a million patrons. There's only one Michelangelo. If you are extremely good at what you do and or it's a very like narrow field and not a lot of other people, then you're sort of the resource people need to have. And they'll reward you for that in a lot of cases.
We just compared Mark to Michelangelo, so he must be feeling pretty good.
That was super nice of me.
To this. Yeah, nice job. So
I assume maybe Michelangelo was a jerk. I don't actually. I know very little about him. But anyway.
He was my favorite turtle, actually, growing up.
I was just going to say, I don't think anyone knows what that is anymore.
He was my number one turtle. So anyway.
Also Raphael all day. Please continue.
So he was getting approached. People were saying, can I please pay you to do this thing? And he's still in school, still, as far as he knows, going to get a business degree and go down this whole other path that he did not end up going down. And he said it took him a bit to adjust to this kind of new reality of like, oh, this could be an unexpected source of income and livelihood and everything like that. And this just reinforces this idea that we keep saying, that it makes sense to make a plan. It absolutely does. And then it also makes sense to realize that few people's plans go exactly as they're laid out, and you don't know how it's going to go differently. And this is it might be a sort of a challenging foreign concept to try to grasp, but you can have a plan that you put time and energy into, and that plan can have value. And then you can also realize that something is going to be a little different and to be kind of mentally ready to adjust to something,
In a lot of cases, there's an old axiom in military strategy. I forget who said this. I should know, but I don't. But the plan is, or the statement is that no plan survives contact with the enemy, with the opposition, challenges, whatever. And you might wonder then along the lines of why do people bother to make plans? And to sort of clarify or say something more directly that I think was implied by what you said. Mm-hmm. The plan itself is often a mental exercise. When you plan, it sort of forces you to think about all the things that might affect what's going on. It forces you to set priorities and objectives. That's what drives the creation of the plan. And that's a lot of the value of the plan. And then the plan goes out in the world, or you go out in the world And when new stuff happens, now you have the framework that you created, for the plan. That framework's in your head, and you can respond in a much more effective, knowledgeable, relaxed kind of way than if you were just sort of chaotically doing whatever it occurred to you to do at any moment.
Yeah, you have that to fall back on, as you said, instead of just having a frantic moment of, oh no, what do I do? Not another way to look at it, because it's not totally different from what you just said. Maybe it's just a different way to phrase it is, when you make a plan, it necessarily is based on the information that's available to you. As you proceed forward in time, more information becomes available, and you're really just updating your plan.
Yeah.
You're just
you could also choose to go backwards in time and have less.
If you can do that, we'd like to have you on the podcast.
That would be a technology community to really get into. Yeah. Or maybe you already have, I guess, by definition. Anyway, go ahead.
Exactly. But yeah, so you can think of it as, now you're updating the plan. In Mark's case, the new information was, I have the option apparently to make money doing this. I don't know yet how much money or what the future will hold, in this arena, but the new information is this is also an option. And then as you go down, you say, the new information is that not only that, but somebody is proposing paying me even more than I'm asking for.
Yeah, apparently super good at this.
That's useful to know. This is just more information, and you're just updating your plan as you go, because you can't see into the future and get that information ahead of time. So, that's another way to look at this.
Yeah. So what we've just discussed would have been a better way to end than the thing I'm about to say. But I did have one thing I wanted to say before we ended, because it sort of ties into a theme that has come up over and over again, really, in all of these discussions in various ways. So during this discussion, we talked a bit here and there about documentation, problems with documentation, also problems with communication, explaining things, understanding them, keeping all of that stuff up to date, having an up-to-date body of knowledge that someone can refer to when they're entering the field, all of those kinds of challenges. Those, in my opinion, I think a lot of people's opinions those challenges have always existed. It's always been a problem that it's hard to communicate stuff and people don't do a great job of it. And it's always been the case, I think, that if you have an organization, a company, a relationship, whatever, where communication happens more and happens more effectively, that almost always ends better than if there is not that communication.
Yeah.
So that's an example to me of something that's very old school, offline, documentation and communication and training and all of that kind of stuff has been around forever. But it's one of those, what they call soft skills, that applies directly today and is perhaps maybe even more of a difference maker today than it used to be, because it's so much more necessary and so much less available to find people who can really understand something, really break it down, really explain it, really make sure the other person understands, really empathize, all of that stuff. So I just wanted to point that out, that is a skill set that you can apply in really any industry. You don't need special training to do it. You just need to pay attention and think about it and try to get better at it over time, and you will. So I wanted to say that.
Yeah, be aware that it's important, and that makes a world of difference. I do want to mention a couple things, and I know we don't want to take forever. He mentioned that if he were starting now, he thinks he'd get into, I think he said Objective-C and Swift. I don't know anything about programming, but I believe those were the correct nouns. As far as languages that he would, think are going to be very useful going forward, he mentioned the idea that coding seems pretty future-proof. It's kind of hard to argue against that. I mean, everything about what we know about what's going on in the world today certainly suggests that this is some version of this will be valuable and important for the foreseeable. I
would like to add, when you mentioned some version, there is a thing that's happening now. It has been happening for a while as software development itself is developing. And we talked about this a little bit during this talk as well, but there's higher and higher levels of abstraction. There's more and more sort of settled ways to code certain things in certain situations where you could Google how to do something, go find a solution that's been battle tested in a lot of scenarios, and more or less drop that right into what you're doing. There is that. There's also the process by which some software writes other software, writes software that in turn writes its own software, and so on. So it's not exactly as though, and I think you would agree, it's not exactly as though the type of coding and development that's being done now is exactly the same as it was, in the early days of when Mark's grandfather, whoever it was showing him how to do a spreadsheet on a type of computer that doesn't exist anymore. It's not like it's always going to be like that. But the skill set of breaking a problem down in terms of technical steps, being able to follow someone else's thought process in that kind of way, being able to interact with machines in a sense, or interact with software, that I think is definitely not going anywhere. It may look different.
Yeah.
It'll look different for sure in 5 or 10 years, but the general idea of being technically inclined, that's going to be a useful skill set for a very long time.
Yeah. And again, to jump back to what you're saying about communication, he mentioned how he likes to do interviews through multiple channels, over the phone, via text, via Slack, via whatever to see, can this person, have a back and forth with me that seems to fit into my requirements for being able to work with people, because that kind of communication feels like a given, or feels like, oh, well, anybody can read or write or type or whatever. That you learn that in elementary school, but that's not the same, just reading or writing or typing, as really conveying information and then also absorbing information.
Yeah. It's kind of funny that it sort of directly contradicts what a lot of parents might tell their children who are high school or college aged. But in this one limited situation, having a college degree counts for nothing, and being able to text effectively is the thing that gets you the job.
Who knew? I'm scared to end on that.
No, I mean, again, other things as well.
There's other context to that.
The body of, but in that, just
but it is.
He doesn't care if you
amusing.
have a degree, but he does care that you can use your thumbs effectively on a touch-tone screen.
Yes.
Touch-tone screen?
Oh, wow.
You know what I mean.
You are old.
I am losing it.
Okay. Mark Jaquith, everybody. Well, that's Mike Barrett was the one who's losing it. Mark Jaquith was the one with all the interesting information. He did mention Raspberry Pi and Arduino are cool, interesting
Now
computers.
you're just saying words.
I'm just saying random words. I'm trying to cover up for...
Is there a touch-tone Arduino? Arduino.
Time travelers? Very nice.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was a rough play on how would we know. Did not go well.
I don't know. I got it. So anyway, yeah, Mark did mention, I won't go for all of them again, some cool resources you can use if you want to get into this and sort of get your feet wet, so to speak.
Which you shouldn't do.
Which you should. Step one.
Stupid joke. Yeah.
Keep your feet dry. And yeah, thank you again, Mark. That was very, very illuminating. And I think that's all we got.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's all for now. If you like the show, please take a moment to rate and review us on iTunes or the podcast player of your choice. And of course, if you want to hear more episodes, remember to subscribe as well. You can find our SAT Prep Black Book and ACT Prep Black Book on Amazon.com, and you can find our online video courses on QuestPrep.com. Please tune in for our next episode coming up in a couple of weeks. And in the meantime, feel free to reach out to us on our Quest Prep Facebook page or the Quest Prep YouTube channel.
This episode was hosted by myself, Mike Barrett, and my kid brother, Patrick Barrett. Our guest was Mark Jaquith. Every musical element was created and performed by Parker Hale Hastings. When the pyramids were built, woolly mammoths still roamed the earth. Our online video courses are different from other test prep options because we strive to teach you every single thing you need to know to beat the test as efficiently as possible in a format that's as convenient as possible. We know you're probably very busy, and the last thing you need to worry about is spending untold hours of your precious youth trying to fit an in-person SAT or ACT class into your schedule. And that's especially true given the fact that most of those courses, unfortunately, are not very helpful for most of the people who end up taking them. So our online video courses are available in their entirety from the moment you sign up. You can watch them on any connected device at your own convenience. And of course, if you feel like you want to spend more time on particular parts of the course, you can easily go back and do that. Once you learn our techniques from the training portion of the course, you'll then be able to see hundreds of videos in which we put these techniques into action against real official test questions. The SAT course includes a set of walkthrough videos for every single question in an entire real SAT. And the ACT course also includes a set of walkthrough videos for every single question in an entire real ACT. Now, our courses don't come with their own practice tests, but there's a reason for that. It's very important that you only ever practice with real official test questions written by the actual companies that write the SAT and the ACT. Now, don't worry, you can get plenty of free practice tests online for either test. So there's never actually any need for you to buy fake third-party tests written by us or by any other company. In fact, we don't write them for that exact reason. Now, here's another critical thing that sets our courses apart. A lot of test prep companies try to prepare you for the SAT or the ACT in the same way that someone else might prepare you for a math test or an English test in high school or college, because they don't seem to understand how different standardized tests are from regular high school and college tests. For example, in English class, your teacher probably rewards you for being able to interpret literary texts and find hidden meanings and symbols that are not plainly stated on the page. But that is exactly the sort of thing that will lead you to a wrong answer every single time you try to do it on the SAT or the ACT. And your math teacher probably rewards you for learning lots of different formulas and theorems and things, and knowing exactly when to apply them when you see a question with a predictable format, like the questions you probably work on in your homework sessions. But most standardized test math questions aren't like that at all. They don't use predictable formats, and you'll find that a lot of them can't even be solved using any kind of formula whatsoever. So our courses don't focus on those kinds of high school and college classroom skills because those things don't really help you raise your score, which is what we care about. Instead, we teach you the actual standards that separate right answers from wrong answers on these tests. And we teach you how to use your knowledge of those standards to find the right answers to every single official SAT or ACT question that you'll ever see. And here's yet another thing that sets our course offering apart. If you decide to sign up for either course, the SAT or the ACT, you'll automatically get unlimited lifetime access to both courses. So if you sign up for the SAT course, you also get permanent access to the ACT course as well, and vice versa. If you sign up for the ACT course, you get permanent access to the SAT course. And permanent access, by the way, also means that your siblings or any other people in your household can use your account to prepare for the SAT or the ACT now or years down the line. And here's one more big difference, and then I'll let you go because I've been talking about this for a while now. If you try out the courses and you decide they're not for you, you can just let us know within 30 days, and we'll give you back every single penny of your purchase. There's no catch and no fine print. Just let us know within 30 days. If you don't like the course for whatever reason, which again, you don't have to tell us what the reason is, but if you don't like the course, we don't want to keep your money. It's as simple as that. So thank you very much for listening to this. If you're interested in signing up, head over to questprep.com and click on the courses tab. Thanks.